Welcome to Who's Views. And in the days before we had DVDs, VHSs, Blu-rays, downloads, streaming, what did Doctor Who fans do? We're celebrating 50 years of the Target books. Yes, welcome to Who's Views, and as usual, I am joined by the WHOTASTIC panel. Welcome to the Brendan, the Time Mother, to Paul, and very welcome to the team, to John down there. Hello, everybody.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Welcome. I know, look at that display. Wow.
Targeted man.
You are targeted tonight. Absolutely. Absolutely fantastic. So listen, this is our 50th birthday party where we're going to be walking down memory lane and celebrating the phenomenal success of the Target books. So very quickly, because I'm not going to go in depth with the history here, but very quickly, I'm going to take you right back and give you a potted history. So 1972, Universal Tandem, a publisher at the time, wanted to expand its business by launching a new children's imprint. What they came up with was called Target. At the time, editor Richard Henwood visited publisher Frederick Muller Limited to see if they had anything worth optioning. And of course, the legend is there. What he found were 3 Doctor Who books, which he snapped up very, very quickly and republished them. And they were Doctor Who and the Daleks, Doctor Who and the Zarbi, and Doctor Who, the Crusaders. And the rest, of course, as they say, is history. That's all you're getting from me from that pottage shop. Because if you want to know more, you can get this. Now, this is my Bible when it comes to the Target book. This is David Howe's book, the Target book. This is the definitive history. It's gorgeous. If you haven't seen this, if you haven't got this, then I would really recommend it. This goes from day one back at those days here. And it's just essential reading. And if you're interested in that, then you can go to the website, telos.co.uk. It's still available. I've checked. It's still in print, and you can get that there. A great read and highly recommended for me, but that's where we will leave the history because we want to move on and we want to get into everything. And wow, guys, I mean, we've been looking at doing this show for a little while now, and it's been fun trying to put it together and deciding where the hell we're going to start, hasn't it?
Well, it's like 40 years of reading it and you try and censor and curate it, but anyway, we'll give it a go.
We are going to give it a go, yeah.
And you read 40 years worth in enough time before the show. That was the real challenge, wasn't
it? Did you manage it, John?
Yeah, I quit my job.
You had to really to get through all this sort of stuff, didn't you?
That's dedication for you.
That's dedication. Oh, no, we can't do any more singing. We're not allowed to do any more of that. That's left it. But listen, I wanted to start off with this one going about. I mean, I remember this. Target, the new exciting paperbacks for boys and girls. Now, this is published in May 1973, and you can see there's the original 3 books that they published here under the Target range. And none of them knew at that particular point that this was going to be a best-selling, award-winning children's range of books. Because, of course, back then, people didn't realize that Doctor Who could possibly have the power that they all come into today, assuming it has. So that was quite fun. But we had some wonderful things coming out. I mean, these covers, I'll show them again. These are iconic, aren't they, guys?
Oh, yes.
Definitely, yeah.
Daleks just is imprinted in my brain, I think. It's just such a lovely cover.
They're shouted out at you. They're on the mini libraries in every primary school, it seemed to me, with that little transparent plastic. Yeah. They were hardback in our school, and hardback books were amazing anyway. But yes, and nobody else picked them. It was funny. It was always like I was never fighting anybody for them. I could have them all the time. But yes, and the local library had a few more, the cave monsters, and that, the ones that came just after that. The Day of the Daleks, etc. And you could go to the local library and they're all hardback with that same plastic coating on. So the early days were this type, weren't they? The Chris Achilleus designs. And it fueled the imagination because you had so much on each cover. There was a lot to see, from the monsters to a definitive Doctor. Yes, and well written.
I mean, for me, it will always be that Three Doctors cover. That was,
that one.
yeah. The one that I got is my granddad gave it to me. He goes, "Oh, I've got a stash of books you might like," and in there was the Three Doctors, but it was that cover.
Yes.
Cover for me just leapt out at me, and I was like, "Oh, I've got to read this book."
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I totally agree with you, Joe. I mean, I think a load of us will remember this, but this was special because I don't know about you guys, but growing up in the time where you were becoming more aware of the Tom Baker Doctor, Target was very, very influential in showing you actually there's been 3 other blokes before him, and I had vague memories of the white-haired guy, know, the big. But then to see this cover, and it was Target that really got me going, saying, "Well, oh, hang on a minute, I don't know." And bearing in mind, viewers as well, no, the BBC didn't do repeats at all. You didn't get repeats back in those days, really. And it was just incredible to see this. And isn't that just, it's an iconic cover. We know the history of this and where its inspiration was from, but it doesn't matter, because as a kid, when this first hit the shelf, you were like, oh my God, there's the 3 of them in the one story. It was a revelation, wasn't it?
And again, seeing that cover,
and
making me want to read that book, it got me onto the VHS when it was released. Literally, I was straight into Smith's to buy that VHS because I just love this story and I love that cover. I never get tired of it. It's
no. Go on, Paul.
It is intriguing. The cover's great, but the back cover as well. You should make me. I used to love this. The back covers of some novels had illustration, and that lovely picture of, I think it's Benton and the Second Doctor and the jail guards taking them to Omega's lair. That's a fantastic image. I mean, these are great. You know, there's lovely back covers. Lovely.
These were surprising, weren't they?
And artist interpretation. They're great. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, these were real surprises when you turned the book around back in those days. When you got these lovely illustrations, and it ran through a number of the original books. Here we've got the 10th Planet one as well.
That's one of my favourites. When you're asking, which are your favourites, and of course it's very hard to pin down, but to see the Mandasian Cybermen, and I love that distinctive kind of lightning going around that, either Mondas or the Earth there, and again that back illustration that just give you a bit more detail about them. The early ones were quite interesting in how they did that, and because you're a fan of a certain age, so I only started with Pertwee, so anything on Troughton and anything on Hartnell was amazing to just see visually. Like you said, no videos, no nothing, no repeats, nothing. So basically, to see a picture of William Hartnell and Nazarbi was all you're going to get. And so it was it was like a telly snaps for us, wasn't it? Because basically you had some lovely illustrations inside with some of these early ones, and that was it.
Yeah.
And that was it. So whichever cover you liked, I mean, mine is probably the 10th Planet. Front and back, you've got the monster on the front and the drama, and on the back, you've got a bit more, and there was William Hartnell. And
I'll tell you something else about the 10th Planet as well that I didn't know at the time, but it's that last paragraph there, the last thrilling adventure of the first Doctor Who. It was Target that told me that this was his last story, because this predated anything else I was getting. The Target books were around, weren't they? So, but the covers have always been very, very special. The covers have always had a place. Sorry, Paul, what are you saying?
I was going to say they could have saved you for a spoiler on that one, couldn't they?
Yeah. You're on a delay again. It's on bloody Edinburgh.
That really
oh, sorry.
When you start, you're desperate to get them. The 10th Planet was the one I was desperate to get. Could never find it. And then one day, my grandma, you go down there after school. I walked across the field, and there she was at tea time, and she said, "I've got you something." And it was the 10th Planet. And of course, and to see that and think, God, when I get home, I'm going to read the last William Hartnell story. And actually to get one of the Target books, which was a regeneration. So I remember after 10th Planet, I read the Planet of the Spiders one to death. Because it was mine.
We'll come to that as well, because I want to come to that, because what I want to do is want to stay with artists' illustrations at the moment, because we do have a special guest, and it is somebody that knows about the artwork process when it came to working with Target, and he'll be able to tell us a little bit more about the trials and tribulations for working for Target. I'd like to welcome our special guest this evening. It is Mr. Paul Tams. Hello.
Hello there. Hello,
Hiya.
gentlemen. Hello, everybody.
Paul, you're very welcome. Thank you so much for coming onto Who's Views and our target episode here. So
That's no
now listen,
problem.
you are artist, designer, producer, executive producer. You've done music in your time. You are a writer.
Thank
You've done a lot. You've done an awful lot in your career. But back at the time, you were also known, of course, for being the illustrator for some of the World Distributed Dalek annuals.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you were saying at the beginning of the show about the books being an inspiration for people to read and everything. For me, it had that, but it also inspired me alongside the TV action and Countdown comic strips and everything, and Frank Bellamy's work for the Radio Times to become an illustrator, and that was my dream. I wanted to work in comic strips, and I wanted to do book covers, all sorts of things like that. And in the mid 70s, I had a sort of Billy Elliot moment. I'd phoned Target Books up, spoke to their art editor, who said, by all means, come down, we'll give you an interview. And I was only 14. And my dad took me on the train, which is the Billy Elliot sort of moment. And he said, "You're very profound for your age, young man. Come back in a few years and see us." So when I moved to London when I was 18, that's exactly what I did. And there was a different art editor then. And before what I did with Slipback and with Fury from the Deep, I was commissioned to do the artwork for the interiors of the Junior Doctor Who books, the Giant Robot and Brain of Morbius.
Yeah.
I illustrated the Brain of Morbius book, and Terence Dix turned around and said, "They're too adult. The drawings are too adult. They should be more like the sort of thing that you see in an Enid Blyton book." So they paid me off for having finished the first one. So I did, something like 30 illustrations or whatever it was, 20 or 30 illustrations for the Junior Brain of Morbius book, and not a lot of people actually know that. A lot of my friends will remember it from the time, because it was very much a big disappointment. So I just moved on, back to my day job at the BBC and any freelance work that came along, like World Distributors and things. I ended up doing Terrorhawks and things like that. So it was put on the back burner because I went to work in television anyway. So it was one of those things that I always wanted to do at least one, and I ended up doing one, but not under the circumstances I wanted to be doing it.
Well, tell us more about that, because how did you get back involved with? Because by this point, you'd done the World Distributed Dalek annuals, especially, but you were very heavily involved with other things, including designing magazine covers. You had a huge hit in 1981 with the Royal Wedding magazine cover that you put together. One of these pull-out poster things we used to get, guys.
I designed the actual Royal
official one,
poster, the official one, through Buckingham Palace, and it was in the days of cow gum and paste up and no Photoshop or anything like that. So it was like and it was done very much quickly and all this sort of thing. And I did quite a lot of film posters that way as well. I did Ghostbusters, Flash Gordon, and Bond, all sorts of things. And this was all freelance stuff. So I used to burn the candle at both ends and still managed to go out clubbing.
Well, that's because at that age we can all do that. We couldn't. How did you get back involved? How did you get back involved with Target?
If you knocked on doors back then, because there was no internet or anything like that, you got lucky enough to get some results. And with working at the BBC, I got obviously friendly with people on Doctor Who as well, and I knew Eric Saywood as well, and he was writing the book after the cancellation and everything like that of Doctor Who in '85. He was writing the book of Slipback, and John Nathan Turner had actually commissioned me to do a couple of pieces of art for him. One was a drawing of Patrick Troughton, that's the one. And that was actually, I managed to get that scan from the guy who sold it after J&T died, because it was sold in the auction. It went for a few £100s to a fan in America.
Crikey.
But you know, it was just odd things like that John wanted to put on the walls of his house. Well, his then flat, but then his house in Brighton.
Yeah.
But so Eric had seen these paintings and said, well, why don't you do the cover for my book? And I said, well, I know the guy there because I did some work for him a few years back. You know, it was only like 5 years on or something from having done the Junior Brain and Morbius stuff. And so the guy said, yeah, it'd be great, get you on board and do it. And at the same time, I think I was working full time. I'd left the BBC and I was working for Rank Films at that stage. And so I was really busy anyway, but I was also illustrating a monthly comic strip in a pop magazine about the adventures of Boy George, and that's another story. But yeah, and they said, we've got a cover, it's a generic TARDIS in space, and J&T had already said no to it, and they wanted to do something a bit more exciting and more comic bookish and something different to the rest of the range. So I said, okay. So I came up with, I was told I'd got a week to do it. And in that week, we went through 3 different designs. I think you got the first one, haven't you, JT?
I do, and it's just coming up right now.
Yeah, so the idea was I wanted to do a bit of a sort of a Frank Bellamy homage with, so a bit like the Dalek cover for Radio Times with the Doctor's face large and everything. But even though I was going to do it all in full color, and with the monster that was roaming the spaceship, which with all the teeth and claws and everything like that. That was the idea. But I wanted to do with the circle. I wanted to do it, and I actually told Colin Baker this earlier this year about it because he asked about it. And the idea was to make it look like it was an old radio set, the cover, and I was going to have like where the monster's hand was and everything. There was going to be switches and dials and everything for, and the circle you see the face would have been the speaker of the old old-fashioned radiogram. And because I think he did some publicity pictures outside BBC Radio or something, and him and Nicola were standing on an old radio, you know, with knobs on it and the circular speaker and things, and that's where I got the idea from. So it was going to be very Frank Bellamy like that. Then J&T said, can you make the monster secondary to Colin? So the monster is behind Colin, so make more of Colin's face. So I actually inked in the rough design for that, and they said it looks too, because they wanted it comic bookish and everything like that. You know, it was like, okay. And then for some weird reason, we left it for more than 24 hours. And then it was like a panic attack. Like, you got to take Colin off the cover. Oh. You can't have Colin on the cover. And I think this was because this was like late 85. This was about the time where I think that they'd realized that he may not be around. So they said, could you just do the main monster and the police box? So that's what they got. And this is the actual pencil drawing I did. Yeah, which I think it's better than the finished thing, to be quite honest, because the feedback was, can you change the angle of the police box so you see it from the top? And I thought, well, that's going to make it look odd, which I thought it did on the finished cover. Did.
Yeah, when we look at the three side by side, Paul, we can see a very interesting evolution here to where we actually got.
Well, I think they did this with most of the artists and most of the covers anyway. That they went through not knowing what they wanted till they saw something that they thought, okay, that's probably what we want. You know, it was like that. It was like with the whole experience I had with the Junior Doctor Who, was that we want you to illustrate it, and they gave me all these 10x8s from the BBC photo library as reference material, because obviously there's no internet in 1979, 1980, whatever it was, to do these books, and which is why I made them look like the characters, and I put a bit of blood and gore and bubbly, Frankenstein detailing into it, and they thought it was just too comic bookish. So I did that, but I only had 24 hours to do that.
Yeah.
I literally spent the whole night, you know, painting it, and it was like I just thought, oh God, you know, and it was such a stressful situation. I mean, I put, you know, I said, you know, send me the artwork back. They never did, and then I found out someone bought it off someone for a bit of money or whatever, not so long ago. And I thought, well, you know, really it's my property, but there you go, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But you know, it's ancient history. But I look back on it now, I just thought, if I'd actually had a week to do it, then yes, I would probably be a lot happier. But it was on the tick list, and I did a Target book cover. I achieved a childhood dream. You've got it there. Oh, you got the hardback.
Yes.
Yeah. I've got a hardback and a paperback, and that's it. Oh, and I've also got this, and this was something that I got from the Doctor Who office at the time, because in the days before you know, digital printing and everything like that, they used to just take a photograph of, which you can see there, of the cover of the artwork, and then put an acetate overlay over it, which the logo's hand painted on the back, and they used to present that to JMT to say, this is the cover art, are you happy with it? And then he would sign it off. And I was in the Doctor Who office one day, and he said, oh, this is your cover. And I went, yes, I know, I recognize it. And he said, do you want this or what? Because I usually chuck them in the bin. And I said, oh, I'll keep it. So I've kept that all these years.
It's lucky you had that one as well, wasn't it? But this wasn't the only cover that you were commissioned to do.
They came out in '86, didn't they?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So tell us about this one, Paul.
Oh, this one. Oh God, yes. This one's had an afterlife too, which I'll tell you about very quickly as well. Fury from the Deep. So they said to me, could you do another cover as well? You know, because obviously this was a rush. And I said, well, okay, I'll do a rough pen and ink, and then, you know, we can go from there. So the idea was, I wanted to encapsulate the monster. I wanted to put obviously Troughton's face on it, and I was giving them the option, which is why I didn't do the other side. I put the police box roughly at the top, and the idea was like, we can either have the police box at the top, or the oil rig, or whatever it was at the top, the gas rig at the top, and have the police box sort of, you know, it's like, you know, it submerged in the water underneath it. And yet again, another sort of Frank Bellamy style impression of it, but obviously bordering on more photorealism. But one thing I've always done with drawings is that I've never tried to make something look like it's copied straight off a photograph. There was a few other artists that did this. I think the guy who did, was it Peter Brooks? I can't remember his name. Did like the Terror of the Autons things and things like that. He did like a comic-y impression of it, you know, the first Terror of the Autons that came out, which would have the drawings on the back and things like that. And that was different to what went out on TV and made to look more grander in scale. And I wanted to do that with this. And so I gave them the option of that. And then it was like, oh, no, we can't have Troughton on there. We don't want older doctors on there, because this was at the time where they were also obviously negotiating a change in doctor. So they didn't want to put stuff out with older doctors on to confuse people. Not that I don't think the people that the market it was aimed at would have been confused.
Not at all. No, not at all. In fact, it would have been appreciated.
So
it would have been,
obviously showed that to everybody, because I used to have dinner parties with Eric and with my friend Sarah Lee, who's JNT's secretary. And so they'd seen it, and I said, you know, I just pulled out of it because by this time I just, you know, I was busy. I was about to take over the comic strip of God, what's it called? Grange Hill for Beeb Comic, as well as doing the Boy George one. So I thought, okay, this is the big break in comics. And then Beeb closed down. I did two editions artwork for it that never saw the light of day. And
I wish I'd still got my Beeb comics. I would have let you see them because I had them all.
Download them on, you can download them on the site. I'll give you the site address.
Oh, fabulous!
But no, it's so I just thought, okay, and I think I'd just done some Terrahawk strips for World Distributors as well, and that was a rush job, and I just thought, you know what, I'm fed up of all these rush jobs, and I'm only ever going to illustrate stuff for myself, and that's why with my production design and everything like that, and everything I've designed, I've done things for myself. Like, I've got about 3 books coming out that it's, all the artwork's mine, and I've taken time to do them, and it's like, therefore I'm not under a rush. I mean, I do stuff occasionally to for a bit of fun for myself, like with Hartnell I did this and then that's the drawing there. I just wanted to do, if I was going to do the animation stuff, how I'd make him look,
Yeah. Who's that on the bottom?
Lovely.
Well, that's somebody.
I thought it might be. Yeah.
It could be a flip book. Yeah. But no, so the afterlife that happened with this, as I was talking about with the Fury from the Deep artwork, this is the actual artwork here.
Wow.
Eric had remembered it, and Eric was writing the audio links for the BBC Record and Tapes cassette tape boxes, and he told the head guy there about this artwork that he'd seen, and he said it would look really good on the cover of the cassette box. So they contacted me. I went in to see them and took the drawing and everything. They this is brilliant. Yeah, so they took a photocopy of it and everything, and I said, it's not finished, but it was the right strip size to go on the CD cover. So, well, CD cover, the cassette box. I've got to remember, this is 1993. It's like, or thereabouts, or when about. So this was a good, what is it, 5, 6, 7 years after the Target business with it anyway. So I just see what will happen, and then the art department said no, we want to stick to the black and white photos we're doing them in a very sort of 90s way. We don't want suddenly start putting drawings on the front, as good as
such a shame
they said it was. It was a shame, but but since then, because it appears in David's great book, I think there it is.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
There's a few fans that have actually scanned it from there and have put it onto, finished it off with putting a police box drawing next to it. And if you Google Fury from the Deep on Google and go on images, you'll find it available for VHS covers, for cassette covers,
way,
CD covers.
Wow!
Fans have used the artwork to make their own covers up with it, and I was
they're so clever. They're so clever, aren't they?
That's the only way they'll have got the artwork is from David's
from the book. Yeah, because it's in your office.
Great book,
that's brilliant. I mean, it's great to be able to get you on to this special, because an actual artist that worked for them and give us that insight. So thank you so much. We do appreciate it.
Yeah. So as I said, it was an inspiration. Target gave me that inspiration, and it gave me that chance to actually break into things, even though probably World Distributors is probably what I'm known remembered for.
Absolutely.
But with Slipback, it's one of those things. I saw someone actually state that was their favorite cover of all time, and I thought you must be suffering from some sort of optical problems. But no, it's one of those things. But if I'd have been given more time, then I'd have been happy with it.
Yeah, because I like your pencil designs there. Those original pencil designs, I think, are lovely. It's just a shame that it was coming at such a turbulent time for the show.
Oh, well, it was, and also, but for people like the merchandisers, and obviously with what I've done since, you becoming more aware about merchandising and what goes on behind the scenes and everything. It's it is very up and down, because you can overnight you can just change something like that. It was like with what happened with Fury from the Deep. You know, I was going ahead to do it. They wanted me to do it. Then overnight, can't use Trout and can't use any old doctors. That's it, the end of it. And I think the similar thing happened when John took over and Peter Davison started, and all of a sudden John insisted they had to use photographs from and the photos they used on some of those Peter Davison early covers were pretty dire.
Well, we will be mentioning them very quickly later on in the show.
I preempted it.
No, it's absolutely fine, because everybody knows where we're coming from when it comes to those. Listen, I know you're really busy and you've got things to do, but before you go, and you don't need to comment about this, but I think this is enchanting. This is from this is young Paul and young Colin in 1985. Very nice jacket. I remember them well.
Mine or Colin's?
Yours. Colin's looks familiar. I think that's the one he actually did his press release in.
Probably. I mean, actors are like that. They recycle stuff, don't they?
Oh, well, we hope
they
so.
They recycle other people's lines from doing plays. So why not?
Oh no, that's brilliant. Jamie's here saying a brilliant insight from you. Thank you very much. And again from us, thank you very much for taking time out to come and see us on the show.
Well,
really appreciate
it. Me anytime, you know.
Thank you.
Yeah, the next time you'll ask me on is about Doctor in Distress, but no.
I don't know if even I've got the the patience to talk about that. No, but listen, I know you're busy. Again, thank you for taking time out of your schedule. It's lovely to see you, and thank you for coming on to our 50th anniversary of Target Books, of which you are a part of, and that's something to be really proud of. It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's one of those things. I can say, you know, one, you know.
Absolutely.
You know, there's some other. Some of the artists are great. I mean, the Chris Achilles stuff I absolutely adored. Because it was so akin to the Frank Bellamy, and with what they wanted me to do with Slipback, they wanted that sort of comic book, like, you know, grandeur. Because I mean, if you look at the cover of the Dalek, the first Dalek one, that you know, he copied those Daleks from Ron Turner from TV21, and you know,
stylized,
very stylized, and there's, you know, and today that none of that artwork's aged. I mean, they're iconic, you know, and the same happened with subsequent artists as well. You know, people like Ali Pearson and you know, Mr. Skilleter. It's like, you know, their work's very recognizable, and it's lived, and it's, you know, it's still out there.
Absolutely. And being recycled as well on the audio books and all this sort of stuff, which is fantastic, which we're not going to talk about on this show because this is all about the original books, but there's another show, I guess. No, it's brilliant. We're going to be talking about authors and the illustrators now in our memories on this. So again, look, thank you so much for coming on and joining us, and we'll be seeing you again, and I'll be speaking to you shortly, I'm sure. So have a lovely rest of the evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
I know you got things to do. I'll see you again very soon.
Have a good show.
Thank you. Cheers, mate. See you later.
Bye.
Oh, fabulous. Oh, right. So there we go. Paul Tams there telling us giving us a little insight into what it was like to work with Target. You are watching Who's Views. This is the Golden Shots. We're celebrating 50 years of Target Books. 50 years. Goodness me. I mean, that makes me feel really old, actually. Two of us are there more or less at the very beginning of this. It's absolutely fantastic. And we are, Paul's led us very, very nicely into talking about some of the authors now. So, Brendan, let's start with you. Where do you want to start with when it comes to some of these artists, these wonderful artists that we're paying homage to?
I mean,
and feel free to chip in, guys, as well.
I mean, this was one of mine from early doors, the Reb of Fear, because obviously it's been changed since. I was just looking at that one, and I can only speak for the ones that sucked me into all of this. You know, this was, I mean, I'll talk later about another one, but this one grabbed me, and this was interesting because I needed the cover, because I didn't know anything about the Troughton stories at all. I didn't know anything about the Yeti. I'd only heard of the Yeti. So this really grabbed me. I love the web that actually centers around his head, and then you've got a nice action shot with the Yeti, and you know, onto one of the unit figures. That's all you needed. You know, I personally want normally to see the Doctor, and I want to see a bit of the setting, and I want to see a bit of the action, and you know, I just need to see some of that to get me going. And so that one,
you know, it sucks you in, doesn't it? When it's on the bookshelf, you see it, and you're like, right, going towards that, and I'm getting it. You know, but you don't even need to know what's inside it. You just see the artwork, and you're like, right.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, can I just go back to that, please, for a second? Because you're absolutely right there, John, because I've said this before, this was my first piece of Doctor Who merchandise. And this was bought for me by my mum when I was poorly. And she brought it home from work one day when I'm in bed poorly. And I couldn't believe it. Now, what had attracted her to it was Doctor Who, but the actual cover there, like you were saying, that she didn't know what this was about. She didn't even know that this wasn't my current Doctor. So this was my introduction. Now, this is really special for me because it's well loved, it's well thumbed. The cover, and we'll talk about Chris Achilleos in a couple of seconds. Well, I've got a lovely graphic of him. But that, imagine I got this and like I have devoured this book so many times in my youth as a boy. This was the one I went through, and the Three Doctors followed it very shortly after. This was the one that made me realize that there was stuff out there for Doctor Who, and I was delighted that years later I got, it's still in the phone, but I got one of these. And he signed it for me when I met him. This is 2017. He signed this one for me when I met him at a convention, and I don't even have that framed. It's in a very, very thick envelope with cardboard around it, so it looks brilliant. But yeah, so that was that one. I mean, Paul, John, do you have memories of the Web of Fear?
Well, this is one a bit like what Brendan's saying. It really stuck out for me as well. Any early stories pre sort of John Pertwee stuck out for me particularly. Doctor and the Cybermen one really stuck out, and when I look at it now, the Troughton one with the Invasion Cybermen on the front, that's the one. My fan brain goes, oh no, it's the wrong Cyberman, but my nostalgic brain says, I love this cover, it's fantastic.
You can see why he went for that Cyberman though, can't you?
Oh yeah,
because that Cyberman is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, definitely. Fantastic image. But Chris Achilleos is one of my favorite artists, and just the initial covers from Doctor and the Daleks up until probably we're talking about Bromwell Snowmen, that kind of first, the black block logos are my favorites. And I also love the illustrations in all of those books are fantastic. He didn't do the illustrations inside though, did he?
He did on some of them. Some of them. You did. Well, I'll listen. What were you saying, John? I'll come back to that in a sec.
I was going to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Doctor Who and the Daleks, didn't he say that he wanted to effectively try and change the colours of the Daleks and the styles of them to almost kind of that picture that different Daleks serve different purposes and different functions within the Dalek Empire? I vaguely recall he said something similar. I'm not sure whether he was allowed to do it fully in the end, but I'm pretty sure early on he mentioned something similar.
Yeah, I think he wanted to make them more fantastical, didn't he, and give them a sort of different life for the novels. I mean, Chris, you mentioned there, Paul, that the interior design. I mean, back in the day, the Target books had illustrations, and I know this is one of your favorites, Paul.
It is definitely.
Yeah. So what gets you about this illustration?
Well, part of the thing is it's a great image, and I'm a big fan of the Silurians, or the cave monsters, as they're called in this particular novel. I wonder if this is put on just to keep Violet's calm, because it's not. It should have been Doctor in the Eocenes, but the cave monsters probably calmed them down. But I think that the imagery is great, and also it's not something you see in the story. It's something that is actually alluded to, but you don't actually see it. It just gives a great sort of sideline to part of the story, and it did. A lot of the novels did that. Had that kind of you saw other parts in the story you didn't see on TV, which made it an expanded kind of story, which is great.
Well, it might have done. I found that I was quite that one there that we've just shown, the cave monsters. Again, this was another early one that I got, and I read this, and it's another one that I love this book by Malcolm Hulke. Absolutely love it. I mean, it just draws you in. For a young reader, it's actually quite adult as well. You know, and I was terribly disappointed when I saw the TV episodes thanks to this, and that happened an awful lot with some of these Target books. When you eventually got around to seeing the videos all these years later, you know, you were like, well, that didn't happen. That didn't happen on the TV show.
It's like-
hang on a minute.
Well, it's like
Is
some
that
of the
been cut? Yeah.
it's like some of the internal illustrations that I sent to you from Terror of the Autons with the master. There's a master, and that one.
Yeah.
It's like a sinister James Bond. This one, I mean, you know, if this is the introduction to the master, and I missed the introduction of the master. I met the master a little bit later on as a kid, but yeah, that second one as well. And
that troll doll there, my God.
Yeah. The troll doll's worse, but look at that laboratory and look at that. I mean, that's much worse than Carry On Screaming, I tell you. I mean,
and much better than we got on television when you saw it on one of the umpteen million VHSs they gave us. I mean, that was one of the Terror of the Autons. This Terror of the Autons, it was in here. And then I got to see it. And in fact, I think it was before, maybe I shouldn't say this. I think I got to see it before the VHS at a Doctor Who convention. Naughty, naughty, naughty. And I remember being absolutely stunned and going, that's not how it should look. And that's not how the troll doll looks at all. The troll doll's got Spock ears and he's got big teeth and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's all because of these fantastic illustrations. We have to say that there were lots of illustrations in the early Doctor Who books. And that's how books used to be. We're going to come to that, Brendan. Hang on. This is how books used to be. We had illustrations in books back in those days, and I want to give a shout out to some of the illustrators. So Chris Achilleos did do the Cave Monsters, Paul. He also did the Auton Invasion, which we looked at there. The Web Planet was John Wood. The Crusaders was Henry Fox. The Cybermen was Alan Willow, who also did the Sea Devils, and the Terror of the Autons.
Right.
So there we go. There. So now this one. There we go.
I mean, can anybody remember watching the Banana Splits? And I think
the Arabian Nights.
Arabian Adventure, yeah.
And this was one of the earliest books I read in primary school, and it's very well written. It's very dense. It's not for little kids really, but then with these pictures, and there's quite a lot of them. It's real classic, like Arabian Adventures. It really stuck me in. I love this. This is action stuff. I really enjoyed these.
Yeah, and Barbara looks fantastic there, doesn't she? She's really giving, you get the sense of adventure with this. You get the sense of drama with these books. And it's a shame that they don't really necessarily do that anymore now, isn't it? Because, I mean, these illustrations were just absolutely, they made a lot of the story. So we've got this from the Sea Devils, illustrated by Alan Willow. How beautiful are these? I mean, we always talk about the cover art, but the internal illustrations are just as iconic here, aren't they?
You see,
definitely.
Superb. And again, they were our episodes at the time, because we didn't think we were ever going to see the broadcast unless they put it back on the telly. So literally, with these fantastic images and the great stories that Target put out, these were our episodes, and that's all we knew until the VHSs came along eventually.
And that's when we got disappointed. What are you saying?
This one was actually the very first book I was given.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually in hospital, and so I was just sat there doing jigsaws because I was bedbound. I wasn't allowed to leave. So this was the first, because my mum remembered. She must have remembered, because we were never allowed to go to the seaside because I was scared stiff of the Sea Devils coming out. I would never go to the toilet in the house because of the scary dark corridor. They had to get the potty out, and I was 3.
Oh, I think we were all like that as kids. I think we all had that dark corridor to the loo, didn't we? We were like.
So those illustrations I sent you there from the Sea Devils, this book I coloured it in. I know. I've had to rub everything out because it's still the original book I've got here. But it looks like a colouring book. Think about it. You're only 5.
Yeah. I am stunned, appalled, and shocked. I am stunned.
They're so well drawn. You just want to add colour. Yeah.
I want to ask Paul. There's one that you really remember as well. When you see this, what do you think of?
Yes. I remember that. Is it this from the Web Planet? Looks at the Doctor is at Blackpool and he's playing on the slot machines. He's gambling. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, because that's him controlling the TARDIS.
Yeah,
there he is, and it's still a beautiful. It looks like Ian's just woken up and he's just finishing dressing there. The picture of Barbara, she's coming in from a room there, going, "Oh, where are we, Doctor?" And there he is, pulling all his levers and stuff. They obviously not seen at all the show. John Wood, who wrote, who illustrated this, he hadn't seen it, but it doesn't matter. I was always captured by this image as well, because I just thought, what part of the TARDIS is that?
Well,
it's what scene. Yeah,
they're ahead of their time.
It's the games room. It's the fruit machine.
The three of them, they're clearly the first ever YouTubers, aren't they?
Of course, yeah.
But also, John, the thing about that is when you look at that, that's what these illustrators would have grown up with in their own science fiction. It's very Jules Verne.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
So you can see where their inspiration for science fiction has come from, and I think that's absolutely magical. Hello to everybody that's watching us, by the way. This is Whose Views. It's the Golden Shots. Nice to see you. Gary Bryant's joined us here, and he's saying I had 2 copies of some and coloured the illustrations in one. So nice to know I wasn't the only one. No. Oh, Gary, you naughty little boy! I can't believe you two. I couldn't do. Oh no, I'm shocked. And Jamie Rees, hi Jamie. He's saying he loves these illustrations. I mean, they are. And when I look at no, don't give BBC Penguin Target Books any ideas now about releasing them as coloured and original ones. You heard it here first, because that's probably on the way now. But when you do look at these sort of things, I mean, as I say, we do spend a lot of time talking about the actual cover art, quite rightly. But there's a hell of a lot of those beautiful illustrations that made us, that made the whole book special. And it really, really did start your imagination going, didn't it? Because as we've all pointed out, no repeats, no VHS, no way of seeing it. For us as a generation, these were episodes that were long gone and would never be seen again, weren't we? Because nobody saw the rise of VHS and all this sort of stuff where we are now.
And fair dues, Target has every right, because we didn't know video was coming. We didn't know all this stuff was coming now. So basically, when you're a Target publisher, quite rightly, your artists can actually embellish, make the scene bigger, make it more dramatic, change it slightly artistically. Fair dues. Yes, there's maybe the possible letdown, but that was never factored in, was it? The point was it's the book or nothing. And so we were grateful, especially as kids. I mean, it's sucking us into reading to actually see these pictures, just to help kind of reinforce what you've read, knowing you will never see the scene. You will never even... Yeah. I mean, there was no Doctor Who magazine then. So basically, there were no photographs to reference. So basically, those illustrations were your handrail, your guide. And like I said, there were telly snaps of the time. So I allow the artistic license, because fair dues, they sold it to us.
Absolutely, they did. I want to move on to something from that John asked me to bring up as well. So, John, like I said with Brendan, when you see this, what memories does this evoke in you?
Well, this cover I absolutely love. This was, again, it was my granddad for me on my birthday handed this to me, because he'd previously given me a big box of Target Doctor Who novels. But again, I saw this artwork on the cover and I was like, I need to read this book. And yeah, it's still in my collection. It's still one of my favorites now. I just think the cover is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever seen, but these are from Ian's files himself, and they're available online. Ian Burgess is the artist for this. That's the final cover that we got there in the middle, of course. Hello, Silver Dalek. Silver Dalek saying hello to us all, everybody. So hi, Silver Dalek. Lovely to see you, and thank you for your lovely comments recently about the shows. But look at those two. I mean, it's again like what Paul was saying at the top of the show. The evolution to get where they finally get to, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because Paul was saying there when he came on, he basically took the art in to the people in the office, and they said, well, we think we see it a bit more like this, and we see it a bit more like this. And here's Ian's design proving that very point. He had the same experience there. He's gone from there to the one we actually got. But I must admit, I remember seeing The Wheel in Space when it came out on the bookshelves, and I fell in love with that cover immediately.
Yeah.
I just thought, bang, beautiful.
And this one's quite a late release, isn't it, in the range, and it's quite rare.
One of the last. Yeah,
this one.
It's rare because there was a fire in the warehouse. Do you remember? Or something like that. The story was that, yeah, there was something like that. So a lot of them were lost. I believe that was good, but it is one of the last ones to come through. Absolutely. We're going to do something a little bit different now for you on this, The Golden Shots. 50 years of the Target book. I hope you all feel very, very old, because we are. And if we have to, so are you. So thank you for joining us. If you were there, hopefully the show is reliving those memories and the importance of the Target books to us back in the 70s and into the 80s. And we're going to do something very different now, because we're going to do a little bit of a reading. And one of the readings we're coming from, this is from Brendan. Now, the Sontaran experiment is quite special for you, I believe.
Yeah, because I hunted high and low. Talk about B&M trying to get blooming, sets off shelves. The Target books were the B&M of the time issue, because there were certain books, it depended where you were in the country and how big or small your W.H. Smith's was. The one in Middlesbrough, I would go in and you would normally see on the shelf about 10 or 12 books, normally white spine, that was it. And
they were all white spine back those in the early days, weren't they? Yeah.
And it was the same ones every week. I'd go in 10p to get into the town on the bus, straight to the shop. Oh, no, it's the same ones as last week. Then I sussed out that you could, if when you looked on the inside sleeve and it said which ones had been printed, you thought, oh, hold on. Now, I obviously loved the Tom Baker first season, and of course, I was missing the books. And the Sontaran experiment, when I saw that it had been printed, I just desperately wanted it. But that was even a faff as well. W.H. Smith, mucked it up, and it took forever. I think I used to go into the town. I think it took me five or six visits, 5 or 6 weeks to actually get my hands on it. And of course, I was desperate to just get home, sit on my beanbag on the bedroom floor, and and read this.
So 70s beanbag.
Because some Sontarans that were for me, I was really into Doctor Who by the time we had the Time Warrior. So when I knew the Sontaran Experiment book was out, I wanted it because I loved Sarah, I loved Harry, I liked Tom Baker. It had the Sontarans in. I wanted this book, and I could only get it by ordering it. It was never going to appear on the shelf in our area.
Wow. So you had to order it through W.H. Smith, and then it got through.
Yeah. So it's like your treasure, because you had to.
I loved it when bookshops used to do that. I don't know if they still do, because everything's available online now, isn't it? But I used to love that. You went into a bookshop, said, have you got this? They'd look on their fiche and say, yeah, it's available. We haven't got it in stock, though, but here's the ISBN. It'll be 2 weeks. Fabulous. Yeah. Happy days. So you've got a favorite part of the book for us right now. If you'd like to read that, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. It's one of the famous bits. I think everybody will recognize it as soon as I start.
And I hope I've got the right graphic.
Right, well, here we go then. So it's like Jackanory, this, isn't it? Except I'm not Bernard Cribbins. Right, so the scavenger stopped and lowered itself so that it hovered a few centimeters above the ground. Then, after emitting a series of extremely high-pitched bleeps, it fell silent. Now, I never knew it was called a scavenger. It was that kind of robot thing, wasn't it? Sarah stared at the enormous dimpled sphere in front of them. It was the size of a large house and resembled a giant golf ball. The red sun was brilliantly reflected from its metallic surfaces as if it were encrusted with rubies. Roth was now silent, mesmerized by the extraordinary globe. The scavenger's tentacle had slackened a little, and Sarah massaged her wrist and waited with thumping heart, her eyes fixed on an oval opening in the lower side of the sphere, from which a ramp led down to the ground. After a while, the scavenger's relays clattered and it stirred slightly. In a flash, Sarah forgot the agonizing pins and needles sensation in her hand and the pains throbbing in her bruised and exhausted body. From the dark opening in the huge sphere came a strangely familiar, but not at once recognizable sound. It was the labored breathing of some vast nightmarish bellows, and it sent icy shivers through Sarah's limbs. All at once, the gaping oval panel was filled by a squat, lumbering shape like a monstrous puppet. Its domed reptilian head grew necklace out of her massive hunched shoulders. Each trunk-like arm ended in 3 sheathed talons and was raised in anticipation towards her. The creature began to lurch down the ramp on thick, stumpy legs, the rubbery folds of its body vibrating with each step. Mean eyes burned like 2 red-hot coals amid the gnarled, tortoise-like features, and puffs of oily vapour issued from the flared nostrils. As it approached her, the creature uttered a raucous gasp of satisfaction. Ah, the female of the species. The blubbery, gasping voice sent a tingle of recognition through Sarah. Lynx, she murmured in disbelief, flinching away in disgust at the warm, sickly breath as the creature stood over her. The wobbling folds of its lipless jaws were suddenly drawn back, baring hooped metallic teeth. Sarah stared transfixed at the ghastly smile while the creature slowly shook its domed head. But Lynx is dead, she managed to blurt. You were destroyed in the 13th century. The creature continued to shake its head. You may have witnessed the demise of one of our number, it gasped. We are many. The shriveled tortoise face thrust forward, its red, piercing eyes boring into her. I am Sty, Sontaran military assessor. Sarah forced herself to stare defiantly back. And what are you assessing? She found herself retorting with a contemptuous toss of her head. There was a menacing pause, and then the creature seized Sarah's arm in its leathery claw. I shall continue, gasping the wobbling mouth, with you. And of course, it's just the continuation from the end of episode 1, isn't it? Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
It had you.
Yeah, we've got.
Fabulous.
Well, thank you for that. That was great. I mean, that takes you right
It's lovely.
back. It takes you really right back here. We've got Jamie here saying that the Time Mother should do an audio book. So yes, if Michael at BBC Audio is looking, you can come through me. I'll be his agent. We've got Gary here. Gary saying my mum ordered the Web of Fear from Badger's Bookshop in October '81, and I got it 9 months later with the 1982 new cover reprint. Oh, Gary, really? Crikey! That's probably why you had to wait 9 months, because the reprint was due. And yet, strangely, that original cover you can actually find still today around you. Gary's also thanking you for the BBC Audiobooks audition. And Silver Dalek's telling us that loves the cover of the Ice Warriors and Carnival of Monsters, my first Target books.
Oh,
We've all got these brilliant memories of things, haven't we? There, we've all got
fantastic,
brilliant memories. Yes, we've got lots. So thank you for that. I mean, the whole thing about this, I mean, that was Ian Martyr's Sontaran experiment. Again, when you got the Sontaran experiment, you vaguely, well, from my age, I vaguely remembered it. And I remember it being very short. And we now know that's because it was 2 episodes. You don't know, register that as a kid. But you get that. But you got the Sontaran. That was a big book. It's a big novel. And this was the beauty of some of the Target books, wasn't it, everybody? They really took some of them took the scripts and made it into a movie. Do you know what I mean?
That's longer than Destiny of the Daleks. It's longer than many. Ian Martyr has really fleshed it out. You get inside Sarah's thoughts. That scene, we all know this scene as Doctor Who fans. It's a very famous scene when she does it better than me. She says links, doesn't she? And you see him come out.
Oh, bless her.
But he's made that into 2 pages, and you are living the moment for longer than on the telly. And I think that's a good writer. And I'm an English teacher. I like his writing. I really do applaud his writing. He brought it alive.
Yeah.
One of my
I was going to say...
Yeah, you go, Paul. You go.
I was going to say, it is longer than some of the novels. I think it's longer than the War Games.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, John, carry on. Sorry.
I was just going to say, with regards to another novel as well, it was the Day of the Daleks. And what I loved about that version was I loved the broadcast episodes, just like most people do. But that scene at the beginning where you see the Doctor and Joe, and he tinkers with the TARDIS, and then you see another Doctor and another Joe. What I love about what Terrence Dicks does at the end of that is when they're coming back after they finish the story, he describes it from the other perspective. So they are the third Doctor and Joe that appear in the doorway at the beginning of that scene, right at the end of the story. And I think brilliantly bookends that book just by doing that simple bit of writing. It's great. Yeah.
But again, that Day of the Daleks is one of those stories that you read as a book, and then the episodes come back, and it's not what it's like in your imagination, because you've taken it because of the wonderful writing, and you've taken it to another level because you've really got into the book. This is why, Who viewers that weren't around back in the day, this is why the original Target book run was so magical and special for all of us, because you were reliving stories that you at that point never thought you'd ever see again. Some of them we still haven't seen, so you still have to go by the Target book and what it builds up. Okay, you've got your animations and stuff coming. For me, they don't match the Target book. The Target books of things like Fury from the Deep and the Underwater Menace, all these are just, it's all in here. I can see it myself.
We see one thing that I had another section in there was, and I think we've all mentioned it, some of the writers, assuming you were never going to see the video and assuming you were never going to, you had Jo Grant was introduced twice, wasn't she? In this one, the TARDIS lands. Now, we all know in Sontaran experiments, the TARDIS is gone and they've got the time bracelet thing.
Yeah.
Well, on the way anyway. On this one, they land with the TARDIS, and it's a bit like Curse of Peladon beginning. The TARDIS kind of tumbles away. And of course, Ian Marter is trying to kind of get that trilogy worked out because, of course, it's a one-off book. You know, there's no assumption. Let's face it, with books, there's no assumption like Harry Potter that you're going to read Ark in Space, Sontaran Experiment, and Genesis. There isn't.
But also because they never came out in order anyway. One month, I mean, we did go through a period in the 70s, of course, where it was just the Fourth Doctor because we were growing up with Tom. Tom was hugely popular, so you would get that, but they weren't really in any order. I mean, one week you might get Robot, the next week you might get Pyramids of Mars, the week after that you might get blooming Keeper of Chocolate. I don't know, whatever it was. You know, it was all very bizarre. But what came after the Sontaran Experiment was, of course, Genesis of the Daleks with an incredible cover, which is iconic to the simplicity of this cover from Chris Achilleos with the Doctor in that sort of, I never liked that color for the Doctor at the time, but now I really appreciate it.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I kind of like that cover, apart from I thought it was Davros meets Cleo Lane. But
there's a name. You'll have to go and Google that one, youngsters. I tell you. Yeah, he's showing his age. But you know what I mean? When I saw this in WH Smith, my copy of this on a Saturday, a wet Saturday afternoon in Liverpool, and there it was on the shelf. And I was very lucky. I was encouraged to read as much as possible. Now I know that my folks weren't too happy I was reading Doctor Who all the time, but it was me reading, so that I was allowed to have a Doctor Who book as long as I had another one. So I was very lucky in those days. So of course it was the Doctor Who one that always got the priority. But this, when I saw it on that shelf in WH Smith in Liverpool back then, I just thought, oh, why is he brown? Why have they done that? Because it reminded me of a tea bag. And it still does when I look at it now. But now I do appreciate that. I mean, it is very different. And I know somebody else that appreciates this is John, of course. And you've got a reading from this particular book for us, haven't you? One of your particular favourite parts.
Yeah, I've got just the beginning of it. So we've got, it was a battlefield. The ground was churned, scarred, ravaged. Nothing grew there, nothing lived. The twisted, rusting wrecks of innumerable war machines littered the landscape. There were strands of ragged, tangled wire, collapsed dugouts, caved-in trenches. The perpetual twilight was made darker by fog, thick, dank, and evil. It swirled close to the muddy ground, hiding some of the horrors from view. And the kind of what it's almost saying there is, you can't see below the fog, but there's, it's a battlefield. There's bodies, there's all kinds of mutations. That was where my imagination went with the Target book when I first read that first bit. And that's
it's almost like Terrance Dicks is doing, as you know from when they showed you the program, but it shows you from that text much better. First World War, that the worst war of all, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, this is when, and we're going to talk about Terrance, of course, because we could not do the show without talking about Terrance. But this is when Terrance was really, really not that pressured, I reckon, to get the books out every single month as what happened later on. But with Genesis of the Daleks, because that's one of the stories that our generation know word for word, because we not only had the episodes, we did get the repeats. We got 2 or 3 repeats, if I remember correctly, of Genesis of the Daleks. We had the infamous vinyl record, which everybody listened to every single night. I used to listen to that, get to sleep every night, and it would carry, it's all in there. I know, line for line for line for line. And then, of course, eventually, but the Target book, we could relive that with these other elements, couldn't we? And so you can actually see the difference between for the Genesis of the Daleks is because it's in our memories. We can see the scenes. So those little bits altered a little bit are quite special.
Just John. As well, where where the Doctor's sent by Ronson to go to the Khaled city to tell them what Davros is up to. In the story, effectively, he's just there at the meeting, but the book lays out he's basically, the Doctor's used all his ingenuity to basically lie his way all the way up the top ranks till he gets to that level where he can have that meeting. And again, it's great, and he really does flesh it out. So if anyone hasn't read it yet, read it.
I mean, it's one of those novels, John, where I say to anybody who comes to me, especially the younger fans, and they'll say, "Oh, which one should I start with?" I actually do point them to Genesis or Doctor Who and the Daleks by Whittaker. They're the two. I say they're the ones you've really got to have. But and we'll come to Doctor in the Dark. But I always warn them about that. I say you won't recognize the beginning, but it's magical. And Gary here, thank you for watching, Gary. Lovely to see you as ever. Oh, look what he's got there! Isn't that clever? He's got that. He said the Target books made movies in your mind, and some TV versions can never live up to your imagination. Absolutely, and that was sometimes, as I was trying to say there, Gary, that was actually the problem for me sometimes. When you would eventually see at a Doctor Who convention or something before the VHSs, you'd see some of the episodes and you go, that's not right. That's not right. Who's changed that? You know, and yet, no, it wasn't about that. We've mentioned him already, but we do have to talk about him now. I think we've got to talk about some of the writers, and we will kick off with Uncle Terence himself, a legend to an entire, a couple of generations. I mean, was there any other name that was synonymous with Doctor Who? I mean, these two went hand in hand. Not only was he writer for his show, not only was the script editor, but he made for quite a long time the Target books a central reading for all of us, didn't he? I mean, we're looking, a decade or something, where all we got was Terence's books.
Well, he has got the credit. He's got the credit of having said the lovely description of a wheezing, groaning noise for the TARDIS to arrive. So he's got that. It's a fantastic description of the TARDIS, isn't it?
Oh, it's one of the best. And Peter Davison's pleasant open face. I'm still not sure, John, if I know what an open face is.
Yeah, I'm still trying to work on that one myself. Yeah.
I think I did ask it. I think I asked him once, and I can't remember. It's such a shame because I can't remember his answer because he was quite magical at giving you really silly answers.
If it wasn't for Terence, though, he was the one. I mean, God knows how he fitted it in. And I know sometimes he can be accused of brevity sometimes. However, there are lots of good ones as well. But Terence Dicks, because of him, we could actually rely on there were enough coming a year. You know, there was. I mean, one of my favorites of his later ones is State of Decay, actually, and that was the year with Strike, and they got 2 books out, didn't they? But State of Decay, Day of the Daleks, and I think, did he do the Autumn Invasion? I think those 2 early ones and the State of Decay I like. But you see, because, they relied on Malcolm Hulke and other few people to do 1 or 2, but he wrote so many that as a kid, you could rely on, there was quite so many coming a year. It was like a little, Crown mini-series.
I mean, it did help. It did help. Sorry, John, it did help Terence as well, because, of course, what happened with Terence is that, yes, he was doing some of his TV work, but as he became a real established children's author because of the Doctor Who books. And he came up with his own characters. There was, I can't remember the name of them now, but there was a teddy bear, which I think was called Teddy's. Yes, and that they were for younger children, but they went on and on and on. And then there was also sort of the kids that were detectives. I loved those books. He did those sort of things, and he became a real trusted name. So yes, he got into all this, but then he went through and made his own, and he became a real icon in the children's publishing world. Everybody knew him, and they knew him as a reliable author. Sorry, John.
What was the other thing he did for Target? Was it the Mountie? Was it the Mountie?
I think it was something like that, wasn't it? Because he worked quite a lot for not just Target but other publishers. But you couldn't keep up with the guy. I mean, he was very well read himself. I'm gonna name drop here. But one of the times I met him out of Doctor Who, as it was in a bookshop in London, a second-hand bookshop just off Soho, and I thought, he was engrossed. He was engrossed with all these books, and he was really. And I thought, do I approach him on this Saturday afternoon, or do I not approach him on this Saturday afternoon? And I thought, sod it. So I did. And he was so fantastic. He was telling me about what he was actually researching for one of his books. And he was looking for a particular book. And he obviously, he said, I spend my life these days in these sort of places, aren't they? And he was fabulous. And he really talked about it. He was telling me about the characters. He was still trying to work out in his head what he was doing. What a gent. But I always picture him, not at the Doctor Who conventions where you would see him, but I picture him in that second-hand shop, which is long gone, I'm sure, down in that part of Soho now, because it's all pubs and coffee shops. But amazing, and what a guy! But he was churning and churning, and you're right. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have stayed with the Doctor Who books.
And in that way, and sometimes he was therefore, sometimes he was criticised for, he stuck to the interpretation. But he actually said that. He said, "Look, I'm a writer. I take somebody else's script and I stick to that script." If there's a logical impairment, he might brush it up a bit and tidy it up. But he respected the other writers. And when we talk about the other writers, some of them did embellish and change. But Terrance Dicks said, no, I'm sticking to the script. I'm not changing the words. I'm not changing the dialogue. That's what it is. So sometimes, and the other thing is that one of the top target editors advised that they wanted no adverbs, no similes, and it's for kids. So basically, Terrance Dicks, you could say, stuck to that quite rigidly, to the formula that was suggested. And so he shouldn't be criticised. And as you know, if anybody produces a lot of books, they're always criticised for, it's like Mills and Boon, you know, they produce too many type thing. Well, that's unfair. He delivered for us. We were hungry for it, and he was following orders, and he was also respecting the other writers.
Yeah, because you're right. I mean, he was given timescales. He talked about those a lot after his time with Target, you know, especially in the conventions in the 90s. He would explain, look, they told me I had to do this within a week or 2 weeks or whatever. Well, similar to actually what Paul, our guest earlier on, was saying, Paul Tams was saying earlier about the artist. So you had 24 hours to churn something out. So this, I mean, from a business point of view, that's all they were interested in, really, wasn't it? Getting something with the Doctor Who logo out on a publication that they'd already told the booksellers was coming. So it had to be done bang, bang, bang. Yeah, you've got 2 weeks to do it. And that's why, you know, we had, I mean, Destiny of the Daleks, I know when that was actually brought out, it was slated. And I think it must have taken us all about 20 minutes to read it because it was so, But also there's a whole point about this as well. Terrance made a lot of money from writing these books. And I remember Bob Baker never been quite happy about. I mean, they got on really, really well, and they had this fantastic relationship. Of course, they were quite jibey, you know, lads together type stuff in a nice way. But it was like, oh, he got all my money. He got, you know, because of all that. Because that's how they would go to. Somehow they would manage to go to Terrance first, and the original authors didn't.
A lot of them didn't want to. A lot of he maximised that. I mean, he wasn't doing it badly. I mean, it's just that a lot of writers they didn't want to do it at the time, so he got the full full payment, whereas it would have been 50-50. And so, sorry, it was 50-50 if he was writing somebody else's. That was it. And obviously 100% if it was his own. And of course, the other writers cottoned on a bit later, which is why we got much more diversity later.
Well, they also got the first stabs. Yeah, the later I got first stabs on their own scripts, quite rightly as well. Gary's here saying Terrance was always proud. He helped a whole generation. He was, and he would talk about that with such fondness. He really would, and he was, wasn't he, Gary? He would talk. He'd be on stage saying, you know, oh, because so many of us were saying, oh, you got me reading, and it was true. You know, I mean, this was a way for a whole age group, wasn't it? Here's a Doctor Who book. Whoa, you know, you devoured it, didn't you? What's that word mean?
He's my J.K. Rowling, you know. For
for all of us, absolutely. Same thing, different cover. TARDIS Spiders has joined us. Hi, TARDIS Spider, lovely to see you. And he's saying here, your set, Brendan, looks like it took some work this week. It did. It's got so much sticky tape and blue tape there, you wouldn't believe it.
My namesake. There you go.
The one who's on his head, he has to read.
we have to also you know, we love Terrance, and thank you to him, and he's so missed. He really is missed by all of us that have met him and you know, and valued him and enjoyed his company at Doctor Who conventions, because he was a character at the Doctor Who conventions, and he was one of those mainstream people there. So but somebody I don't think any of us would have got to meet was David Whittaker. I mean, taken far too soon, and didn't really get to understand the success of where Doctor Who went to. But his take on the novels he wrote was incredible, wasn't it? I mean, of course, he came up with the now legendary Doctor Who and the Daleks, which, of course, in the last year has, well, I mean, this has been out so many times, but in the last year, it's been published by BBC Penguin Target Books as a huge, big, illustrated volume. And if you've got that, you'll know what I mean. To give it fresh light as well. But there it is again to a new audience. But do you remember picking up? I don't know what age you guys were, but I must have been about seven-ish when Doctor and the Daleks was bought for me. Yeah. And I was confused. Let's put it that way. At the very beginning, I was very confused, going, what is this? And I remember my dad had to take it away for a night. And he read the book and he came back the next day and he said, no, this is what this is about. And it's probably because they didn't know there was going to be more. Perfect sense then.
it's a bit like Susan reading the French Revolution. It's like, that's not right. So you know what I mean?
Chris Chibnall had nothing on David Whittaker. David Whittaker got there first. But I mean, you know, there's did somebody want to talk about the Crusaders?
Yeah.
Ah, right. Well, I've got this here because, of course, another one there. Excuse me. This is a great time for me to get a drink. Another one that David Whittaker wrote was the Crusaders. And we've got this now. So I'm going to hand over now to Brendan because you're going to give us a bit more from this, aren't you?
Well, there was, I mean, it's in the prologue. It's funny that John was mentioning the prologue to another book, but oh my God. You see, this is it. Let's go back to the beginning of time here. David Whittaker knew Doctor Who inside out. And I'm just going to read this very first paragraph because I think it sums up a lot of Doctor Who. As swiftly and as silently as a shadow, Doctor Who's space and time ship TARDIS appeared on a succession of planets, each as different as the pebbles on a beach, stayed a while and then vanished, as mysteriously as it had come. And whatever alien world it was that received him and his fellow travellers, and however well or badly they were treated, the Doctor always set things to rights, put down injustice, encouraged dignity, fair treatment and respect. And I think David Whittaker, good old David Whittaker, he knew that series inside out. Of course he did. And look, I love his writing because he's talking from conviction. He's talking from the origins of the programme. And what a sum up of what the TARDIS was about, what all these adventures were.
And it's beautiful.
About. Yeah.
It's beautiful. Those words themselves, it's magical. And when you look at that, again, when you, as a kid, when you picked up the Crusaders, we had no idea what this story was about. I certainly didn't know about it. Doctor Who Weekly hadn't covered it at all. I don't even think Doctor Who Weekly was around at the time. Showing my age. You know, oh, it's terrible. But you know, you were thinking, oh, now you had some sort of inkling of that period because you touched a little bit on it at primary school in history in those days. They probably don't anymore now. It's probably not woke enough. But you know, it's a real case of like, you know, you were thinking, oh, what's this about? What crusade means this and that.
Oh yeah.
And then to get that passage there, that prologue then. I mean, Doctor Who book taught me what a prologue was basically. This was the thing before the story. Because what comes after that is totally different.
Yeah, and I don't worry, I won't read it out. But the next page, I'm trying to sell this for people. The next page, he spent a whole paragraph on Ian Chesterton on how much he's changed since the series began, since he started traveling with the Doctor, and you get this whole insight. Really interesting insight into him here. I mean, I'll just show you a bit.
Well, read it out because I've got it up on screen. Read it out.
Okay. So Ian and Barbara had changed too. Ian was now a deeply tanned bronze, his body trained for a minute, no single trace remaining of the ordinary Londoner he had once been. But the alteration wasn't confined to muscle and sinew alone. Ian had encountered situations beyond the concept of any young man of his age. He had faced dangers and been forced to make decisions a countless number of times where not only his own life, but the lives of others stood in peril. Experience had proved to him that strength and fitness alone weren't enough in the sort of emergencies he had to handle. And so he had turned his new life to advantage, learned from it and improved by it until his brain was sharp and active, tuned to deal with whatever problems might present themselves. And then it goes on to do the same to Barbara.
Yeah. Go on,
Go on now, okay. The change in Barbara was entirely different, harder perhaps to find, a much more subtle thing. For unlike Ian, she could have been put back in London in the old life she had known, among friends and acquaintances, and that one of them would have found any major alterations to puzzle or bewilder them. The golden tan on her skin might have come from a long holiday in the West Indies. Her superb physical condition could be explained away by regular visits to a gym. For what was totally new in Barbara grew and fostered inside the girl. She had always had that sense of mystery about her, even on Earth in her own time. She had always been very beautiful. Her mind had always reached ahead for answers and conclusions, while others struggled to grasp the situation. Now, life inside the TARDIS had given full rein to her air of mystery, and the adventures outside it had deepened her love for life in all its various forms, maturing her sense of values, given her the ability to taste the joys and sorrows of existence to the absolute last drop. Where her face and form had conjured up beauty in the eye of any beholder, now beauty radiated from within and trebled her physical attractions, making her the admiration and desire of all who met her. I mean, this is the prologue. This man knows the character, he knows the story, he knows what the TARDIS is about. Oh, please, if nobody's read any of David Whittaker's, please read them.
You have to, and that prologue, as you're saying there,
yeah.
I mean, it's magical. And I sometimes think, and I think I've said this in the last few years, there are certain writers today that need to read that prologue before they ever approach Doctor Who on television in the 21st century. I'm going to say it because he captures exactly what our beloved show is all about in a couple of pages, and what it should be, and who the Doctor is, and what he's like, and what his companions should be like, because they don't really, they don't alter that much. And it's there. That magic, I would give that to any potential new writer in this day and age when they're all full of ideology and all this. Read that book, read that prologue from David Whittaker from back in the 60s before you even put pen to paper, as it were, and write your script.
Yeah. And that's also partly who I picked. I mean, like I said, I'm an English teacher. That's quality writing. But the other thing is that was written in 65. And so basically, right at the origins of the program, we are getting given a template, which quite rightly, JT, I think should be given to any writer now for Doctor Who. We don't get these other words and other things being added to. The companions change, they're hardened, they're mature, they have a self-learning process, which is brilliant. That's all we need to know. The TARDIS and their adventures is all about being dignity, fair treatment of others. That's all you need to know. That is anybody out there who tells us that Doctor Who's about something else, that's the prologue.
Yeah. I mean,
even away from Doctor Who, it's if they weren't so cherished by me, I'd send my target novels to some scriptwriter in the US and say, it's not all about special effects and flashbang wallop. Develop the characters, develop the story, and people will tune in and they will watch it. You don't need to spend millions and millions of effects.
Well said, John. Well said, because that's what I say. I totally agree with it. I fear this an awful lot about what we've had over the last few years from entertainment, what we're possibly going to get. And it's all been about, the CGI must look good. Oh, it must be fast paced, but they've sacrificed story. They've sacrificed character. They've just given shambly KPI tick boxing characters out there and all this stuff around them. Whereas these original Target books, as we are seeing through those readings there, and thank you guys for those, capture character, capture mood, capture the whole element of what the story's about. It makes you want to know more. It welcomes you into the story, as a novel should, but that should transfer to a screenplay. Gary's here saying David Whittaker didn't write for children, he wrote for everyone who loved good books. You're absolutely right, and that was the whole beautiful thing. And tying in with that, he's also said here that it's a shame Kenneth Williams or Bernard Cribbins didn't read a Doctor Who on Jackanory like the Agaton Sack stories. Yeah, they never actually bothered, did they, on Jackanory? I was always waiting for that moment on a Monday, because Jackanory, for those of you who don't know, ran Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday every week on BBC One as part of what is now children's television. Yeah, thanks, Brendan. Yeah, get it off. I'm talking. We'll come to that in a minute. Get it off. And
is Bernard Cribbins in that one?
Yeah, and what we've got is with Jackanory, it really helped authors. And they read some fantastic things over those 4 days. It was only on for about 20-25 minutes a day, but it read the entire book, sometimes abridged, of course. Doctor Who never featured in it. And yet Target Books, back at that point, was the biggest selling children's book range in the United Kingdom. Without, there's no, the proof is there. They were huge, and the BBC ignored its own show. And I'm not quite sure why. It could have been that whole Out of Doctor thing, or it could have been just unimaginative, or it wasn't being taken seriously properly, or because they couldn't get I don't know why, but every Monday I tuned in to see if it was going to be a Doctor Who story that week, and it never, ever, ever was. We've been joined now by our friend Michael. Java Bean is here, all the way from Australia. Morning, Gawley says you're up late, and you're up early. Good morning to you. And then we've got Richard here. Richard's joined us. So happy to find your excellent channel. Thank you, Richard. That's lovely of you. Thank you very much. Please like and subscribe. And greetings also to Brendan, Paul, and John, and all in the chat. Absolutely lovely to see you, Richard. Yes, today we are talking 50 years of the Target books. We are celebrating 50 years. Every time I say that, I'm just thinking, oh my God. The other person we need to acknowledge here, of course, now is this man, Malcolm Hulk, another gentleman of his time. But I mean, one thing you get in common with these guys from the who all grew up more or less at the same time, and even Ian Marter, who would have grown up a little bit later on, they were proper writers. They had been brought up
Yeah.
with good fiction to be inspired by. They had been brought up with excellent education of the British system, and they knew how to write a story. And when it came to looking at the scripts from a teleplay, they knew how to take that teleplay, that screenplay, and make a novel out of it, didn't they? And Malcolm Hulke was magical. I mean, they were all magical, weren't they? But Malcolm Hulke as well. I mean, we talked about the one before, didn't we? The Silurians and all that. I mean, wow.
I mean, going back to that, what Brendan said before about the cave monsters, I think this was, correct me again if I'm wrong, but I think this was one of the first novels we had where you actually had a part of it that was actually from the point of view of one particular Solarian. And, you know, again, when I came to watch the actual TV show, I was like,
wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, where is it? Where is it? So, yeah, another fantastic read, you know, that I never get tired of.
And as Gary Bryant said, and I totally agree with him, I'm going to say, as a teacher, this works. Don't write down to the kids. David Whittaker, Malcolm Hulke is another one of my favourites because you normally got quite dense books. They really did embellish, lots of good description. They didn't follow the target editor's rule. There's adverbs in there, there's similes in there. They described. Yeah, exactly. Don't talk down to kids because we can live up to it. We can do it.
And yeah, I don't know. I mean, J.K. Rowling, decades later, managed to do this. The most successful female writer in history, she didn't actually pander to, I can't scare the kids. She went out and she scared the kids. The adults came along to the books then as well, didn't they? She managed to scare all the adults that were reading those Harry Potter books. And, you know, I mean, the Harry Potter books did remind me of the Target Doctor Who books. I mean, I'm sitting in, what was it, the late 90s as a 28, 29, and then early 30s as the books came out, on the tube, going home from work in London. Everybody's reading the latest Harry Potter on those tube. Happy days. Because I remember looking up one night and going, oh my God, this is never going to happen again in history. And it hasn't. Every single person on the tube was going home reading the latest Harry Potter or one of the recent Harry Potters. Yeah. And I think, you know, if we'd had that big marketing campaign, we would have had those with the Target books back in the day. Everybody being, especially these by Hulke and Malcolm Hulke and David Whittaker and all that. I mean, it was absolutely fantastic. Gary's hit on the nail here. Mac had the knack. Yes, we need to get that on a t-shirt when we all meet up at whichever convention we're going to all meet up at. Richard here is saying the Target novelizations gave him the chance to escape and wonder. So many happy memories of buying these excellent books. We are all with you on that one, mate. I mean, that was absolutely it, wasn't it? I mean, it was just absolutely magical, and that's why we're celebrating 50 years on Who's Views tonight as well. An interesting point here from Richard. What do you guys make of this? Hulke always managed to humanize the baddies and show children that problems are not easy to solve.
Well, they were political. There was context. There was a reality to it. So it wasn't like a stereotype monster in that way. You did, you know, the Green Death, for example, when you get behind the boss, you know, you realized, you know, everybody had a motivation that made sense. I suppose that was it. You know, they weren't just wanting to take over the universe. He had quite gritty ones. I always thought, Malcolm Hulke.
I mean, the ending of that cave monster story, you know, and it's in the TV episode as well. The disgust of the Doctor when Unit blow up the base, and he sees both sides of both points of view, doesn't he?
He does.
And you know, he's wondering, you know, which one's the better of the two. You can almost see his mind thinking that at one point. It's very clever writing.
But the other thing about all of them, I don't know if you guys always care, they always knew that the Doctor was an alien. It didn't matter which face he was wearing. And I think Terence, of course, we don't have to talk about Terence. He knew that the Doctor was the Doctor was the Doctor. That was his phrase. But he knew the Doctor was an alien. But even so, even in the early days, so did David Whittaker. They knew there was a sort of quality. He knew there was a quality to him here. This guy wasn't from Earth. And tried to bring that through. And I think he managed it. But so did Malcolm Hulke. So although in the situation you're talking about there as well, John, he is looking around him. He's looking at his friend, the Brigadier. And this is early days for the Third Doctor. We've got to remember as well. But he's looking at where the side, and what comes out in the writing is that balance, but also the what am I doing with these humans?
Yeah.
And it became a seminal moment in Doctor Who because he references that quite clearly in the Sea Devils. When the first time he comes across the Sea Devil, he says, "Don't be scared of me." And then later on in Warriors of the Deep, of course, again, the Peter Davison interpretation of the Doctor was irritated again at the end. So what John was saying, the end of the cave monsters, the Silurians, was a seminal moment because suddenly you saw the Doctor acting in a very different way to everybody else, which is, they are aliens, I must be scared of them. No. He was extremely gutted at the end of the cave monsters. It became such an important moment in Doctor Who history that it's been referenced in Sea Devils, and it was almost repeated in Warriors of the Deep.
Yeah,
It was, and this is one of the brilliant things about having Terence, Uncle Terry. Yeah. God love him. God love you, Terence. But this was the brilliant thing about having Terence in our lives as an author, because he knew Doctor Who to the finest detail, like we did. He knew every single bit of continuity, didn't he? So when he came to write The Warriors of the Deep, which he had nothing to do with, because it was filmed in '83, broadcast in '84. He knew those little bits that he could put in if he wanted to. I always knew that with Terence, you're in a safe place. You know, we're in a safe place of hands here, because he knew Doctor Who, he knew the Doctor, he knew the characters, he knew the backstory, he knew it. He was the guru of Doctor Who. He knew, because he wrote so many of them, he understood. He was the guru of the target books. He knew where he could thread things in. And as you said, Paul, as well, if it wasn't for Terence, we wouldn't have wheezing, groaning sound, which is still used today by some of the younger ones that don't know where it comes from. But I love the fact that they know it's there. You know, it's great. I'm just going to actually, for a second, just interrupt this show for a quick break, a blatant plug, because if you're a Who's Views regular, you will know that very recently we have run, as part of our review shows, a poll here on the channel to ask you which show the WHOTASTIC panel should be reviewing on the September the 21st, which when a point of live broadcast here is next week. So we asked you which show you wanted us to review. The time was up today, and we can tell you now who you chose. It's tight going. It really was tight going for a little while there, and even for a minute, the Visitation nearly got in there. But yes, you voted. I know we're going to get round to that one. I'll get them anyway. But yeah, you voted. Thank you so much for everybody that voted for it. The Unquiet Dead is the viewer's choice. We will be reviewing that next week, so we will all be watching that this weekend, and we hope you will be too, and join us next week. Also next week, tying in with our Target special as well, we'll be back on Tuesday for our first in our companion piece series with Sarah Jane Smith and Elizabeth Sladen. Hopefully you'll be able to join us for that as well. Back to Target and 50 years. We're celebrating 50 years of the Target book here, Golden Shots. And yeah, wow. So we've spoken about some of the authors. I just want to also who remembers getting these things at Christmas?
Oh yeah.
Anybody get these? These would make my Christmas. You know, these were rare back in the late 70s and early 80s. If you got a box set, it would have 4 Target books in usually, and it would help to push them up on your shelf, and it would help to add to your collection. And I remember being overjoyed in 1982 when I got, very lucky boy, I got 2. Absolutely. Wow. I know. I was wetting myself, and it kept me quiet, according to my mother, for months, because I had to read all the books.
It's just downhill from there, isn't it? Really?
Oh, you know, amazing, yeah. But the Visitation that you've got there was in one of those books, and I mean, you know,
that's not bad. Can I ask you all a question just about the Target range? Can you remember when they started putting on the cover the number? And I hated it.
Yeah,
and it was
and the number messed up, didn't it, at the time?
I don't know why they. Well, I do know why they came up with that. But it wasn't worth talking about because it wasn't in any order, was it? Because we had them in broadcast order because we're all like that, aren't we? So we've got them all in glittering broadcast order from Unearthly Child onwards, and then suddenly, and when you look at them now, I mean, I can see them from here because they're over there. Yeah. Oh, for heaven's sake! Why did they? I don't know why they did that. So anyway, yeah. Well, let's see what you lot saying in the chat. Let's have a look at this. Money well spent, JT. It really was from these. And Rich, you didn't know what? The gift set books. It's really weird because they actually started doing them again during the Tennant time, where BBC Books put the original 10th Doctor books into these. And when I saw those, it just took me back to those Target ones as well. Richard's also saying that the Unquiet Dead is a great choice. Yeah, that's fine. Here we go. He bought the Star Quest trilogy by Terence. That's the other one I couldn't remember. I only had the first paperback. Great stuff. I remember the Star Quest stuff. Yeah, that was wonderful. And also he's saying here the numbers on the book sucked, not in broadcast order. This is just so annoying. Yeah, it didn't work at all. Let's move on now to artists. So we've talked a little bit about Chris Achilleos, but then in the 80s we got another version, if you like, of Chris Achilleos, didn't we? For, we all got that, and it is, of course, the one and only Mr. Andrew Skilleter. There he is there. I mean, this was a different take on the covers, wasn't it? When his first one was the Abominable Snowman. Do you remember that sort of moody cover? And it went from there, didn't it? I mean, he gave us some of the most incredible covers as we suddenly turned into teenagers, and we're still getting these books, which is a feat I'd like to see them do today. When they go from younger into teenage. The teenagers today, how many of you, if you're a teenager watching the show, are you reading? And if so, what are you reading? Please let me know, because I don't know if you are. Are you all too busy doing this? But in our day, you didn't. You went from your primary school and 10, 11, and yeah, you did. You got a bit stroppy maybe. But for us, the target range was consistent. What were your memories of the Andrew Skilleter covers, guys?
Go on.
Just being spoiled. I think we were just spoiled, I think, really, as Doctor Who fans, to have these great artists that were putting out these fantastic covers. And, again, there wasn't ever a cover where I thought, oh, that's horrible. But, Andrew's, I really did love Andrew's covers. Again, similar to what we were saying before, I'd see it on a bookshelf and that was it. It was like a magnet just dragging me towards it. I had to have it, Mum and Dad, get your money out.
And they'd say, get a job. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I remember his 5 Doctors cover and it coming out early, when it was released early, and we got it 2 days before broadcast, I think it was. It was a great cover. Not as good as his Radio Times cover version, but I like that version too.
I mean, the whole thing about the 5 Doctors cover, you're right. I mean, it did come out early. I think it was about a week early, wasn't it? I can't remember offhand now. But it was foil, wasn't it? Do you remember that? Do you remember it being a foil cover?
Yes.
The foil cover with the diamond, and then
yeah. And I was trying to find the cover there to show you, but you all know where it's like, and I can't find it now. I've put it somewhere safe. Could be anywhere in there, but no, never mind. But we've got all that. The other thing about this, I mean, we did get some wonderful covers. I've got a selection of, pardon me. I've got a selection of some of Andrew's here. My favorite out of these was The Keeper of Traken. I remember getting that. Now, I think this came out more or less at the time the show had been on air. And I think it really was in another of those famous box sets I've just been talking about. I'm sure it was in that one with The Visitation. And this cover, I mean, look at the way he's captured Sarah there as Nyssa. Something about this cover to this day, it's beautiful.
That I always remember going in, and it was always facing me as I walked into the school library.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that one was always right at the front. And like Brendan was saying earlier, you had like a plastic covering over them at school at the time.
Yes,
that one was there next to the Isaac Asimov range. But that one, every time I always remember that cover. Trying to grab my friends and say, look, Doctor Who. Read
And I
it,
bet
read
by that point they were really interested. By that point, were they really, your friends?
18.
Did he do?
Yeah.
Did he do Did he do Warriors Gate and Leisure Hive? Because those stood out to me, and they look similar. I can't remember if they're Andrew Skilleter at all.
I'm sure they are. I'm sure that I can check for you in a moment. But I mean, again, Paul Thomas was our guest at the beginning of the show, and he was telling us about his experiences with Target and the cover art. And we've seen a couple of others as well from like Ian Burgess, etc., etc. And in certain circumstances, they were given like 24 hours to paint some of the artwork, but not all the artwork got through. And we can see there in the middle there, we've got the twin dilemma. That's the cover we all know. That's the one we get. It's incredibly green. It did hit you when you saw it on the bookshelf at whatever bookshop you went, because they were always face out on the, you know, as soon as they got in, they knew they had to put them face out. This one really screamed at you as soon as you walked into the particular department it was. But of course, in the intervening years, Andrew has shown us what he had in mind originally, and I prefer it.
Yeah, definitely.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that would, I think that's stunning. And yeah, the story is there as to why they said, no, we don't want that. We want to favor the monster. It's a shame though, because that is another beautiful piece of art, isn't it, everybody?
Yeah, it's lovely. It's a shame.
Definitely, it's interesting that the.
You're there, Paul.
Sorry, I was saying it's interesting that they don't favor the Doctor. They don't favor the Doctor. They favor the monster, the companion. I think Paul was saying earlier on about not favoring doctors and things like that. It's interesting in the 70s when they brought out hardback copies of the Crusaders, I think it was, and the Zarbi. They had Tom on the front cover. Do you remember that?
Yeah, especially the foreign versions. It was a picture of Tom there with some element of the story on it, because Tom was the Doctor that sold. So if you go abroad where they're published under different names, of course, it's not the Target brand, but it is the Target book. It gets very confusing. It really does get very confusing. But he was the Doctor at the time. But I'm so glad the Target books didn't do that. The other important thing that Andrew gave us, of course, was the cover. I mean, we were so excited when Doctor Who Weekly told us, Weekly into the month, I think it would have been Weekly still at that point, but when they told us we were getting this, I nearly wet myself.
Yeah, that's a lovely illustration.
I mean, it just starts off the whole range, and I know it doesn't tie in with the Daleks book that comes after it by Mr. Whitaker, but it doesn't matter. But we were all excited to get this, weren't we? Doctor Who and an Unearthly Child, again written by Terence, and this gorgeous and beautifully detailed cover by Mr. Skilleter is just absolutely fantastic and just sets the scene. Paul was saying before that, you know, they had, if the slipback book hadn't come through, they were just going to put a picture of the TARDIS out there. Now, they also did it with the Keys of Marinus because they didn't have anything else to go, or they didn't know what to illustrate the Keys of Marinus with. So they put a picture of the TARDIS out. There's only one book I think you should do that with, and that's the one. Unearthly Child is the one. And I know he's done an update for the video covers. Remember, he did one with Hartnell and Carol Ann Ford on there. With that, this one for me is still iconic. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, you can imagine that illustration writ large, and then, you know, the prologue paragraph I read from David Whitaker about the TARDIS's adventures. You could almost put the audio above that and enjoy the illustration that this is the very beginning. It starts here and it's in that machine and we'll go anywhere. Yeah, it has to be a TARDIS. And I think just remembering where David Whitaker was going with that prologue, just blend those two things together.
Yeah. And again, when it was announced that an Unearthly Child was coming, because it's hard to tell you now if you weren't there, but that's the one we all wanted. Everybody wanted the first story, because at that point, your shelf would start. Do you remember, guys, with Doctor Who and the Daleks? Doctor Who and an exciting adventure with the Daleks. That's where it started, and we all want. And I don't know if the older fans petitioned for it or anything like that, but we all wanted it. You know, we all wanted it. And when it came out, when they said yes, we're doing it, and you found out that Terence Dix was writing it, oh yeah, I was a happy 9, 10, 11-year-old, however old as well. Richard is saying here that particular cover for Unearthly Child was so special to him as well. So few images of the TARDIS at the time. I can picture myself in my old bedroom and looking at that cover on my shelf. Did anyone else do that? Because obviously Richard was the same ilk as myself. when the book, I would study the cover for hours.
Yeah.
Soaking in every detail of the book covers because they were so good.
Oh God, I used to do it like you know, like we were brought up on those American programs where, you know, like they'd go for a break and then they'd do a reprise after the break, and I would stare at the covers. You know, I got to a point, a cliffhanger, because Terrance Dicks used to do cliffhangers, didn't he, through the book? And then you'd get to the end of a chapter and I'd be staring at the screen again. And sometimes I almost did a whirly effect and thought, right, and it's time for bed. You know, it was that kind of thing. You had your torch and you thought, right, let's just get one more bit. You were almost making your own little movie for your head. You end the chapter, you look at the screen, and then bed.
So it wasn't me then that had the quilt over their head with the torch on the go, reading their target.
Yeah. When we were supposed to be sleeping, ready for school. No.
I think many of us were like that because I was the same. My parents made a mistake one Christmas of buying me one of those big 1970s silver torches, which you could change the colours on at the and you know you could hear them coming up the stairs. You were supposed to be asleep, but you'd be busy reading, wouldn't you? The kids today won't have any clue how magical these times were. But you'd be under the cover with your torch, and you could hear them coming up the stairs. You switch everything off. You know, wouldn't you? It was just happy days. Gary saying he thought the Unearthly Child cover might glow in the dark. He was disappointed when it didn't. I love that. That's quite sweet. But yes, we had all the Andrew Skilleter stuff there as well. And at this point as well, there were experiments going on because Andrew Skilleter was not only given original covers, but there were him and a few other artists were also asked to rejacket some of the original 70s ones as well. So it was actually quite an interesting time because at some point I remember going into the school library and seeing these together, and I got a bit confused because I was familiar with the one on the left, and then suddenly in the school library the one on the right appeared as well.
I mean, let's be honest, JT, us Doctor Who fans, we don't go and buy another version of something we've already got, do we? We wouldn't do something like that.
Not more than once. No.
Yeah.
I must admit, guys, I had to have a word with myself in the 90s when the blue spined edition started to come through, because I suddenly realized I was doing it all again, and they were more expensive then, weren't they? They were around about $2-3.99 or something. And I thought, what are you doing? You've got all these. Stop buying things just for the lovely covers. You know, stop it. But that was confusing because for a minute I thought, oh, it's a different book, and then you start reading the beginning. You think, oh no, I've read this. But then you would still sit. I remember sitting in the library for hours, devouring that brand new cover, thinking, "Ooh, that spider looks really good," and there's the Metabolus 3 crystal. It was just magical. We were very innocent times, weren't we?
It was the same. I remember robots. I remember what was different, and I think to when I was ordering them, you can see I've got the other planet, the older planet, the newer Planet of the Spiders. I've got the newer robot one, and sometimes when you ordered it, you thought, "Oh no." Because actually, like I was saying with a lot of them, I liked almost that cartoon effect where you got the monster, a bit of the setting. So Sarah with the spider on her back, with the doctor's face, is kind of telling me, and of course the regeneration heads at the bottom. That's exactly what I wanted the story to be about. It's a lovely illustration, the one I've got, obviously, with that blue crystal and an impressive spider. But in a way, I was wanting the other one.
And I just want to say, reading under my quilt with a torch Planet of the Spiders about giant spiders when I'm meant to be sleeping was not a very good idea.
Yeah, that's a very good point there, isn't it? Because you know,
almost
yeah.
The other thing is, I read Planet of the Spiders more than most of the target range. It was a regeneration. It was my doctor. I loved the story, and I read it a lot. And all that Buddhism stuff, I used to copy Terrance. Sorry, I used to copy a lot of the plot and put it into my stories in year 8 in second year English. And the Catholic school sister, my teacher, would say, "Oh, this is very interesting, Bren. What's all this Buddhism stuff? What's all this? You know, you're a Catholic. Get on with it." And of course, I would put all them Buddhist chants in. I was just copying.
No,
it had such an impression on me.
How fun! I mean, but this is the whole point of it. I mean, this is the impact Yeah, this is the impact, Paul, of our generation, isn't it? I mean, not only did it get us reading, not only did it sustain our interest in reading, not only did they keep coming through the 70s at a vital rate, in the 80s they grew up a little bit, didn't they? We've spoken about Ian Marter already, but they did grow up a little teeny weeny bit. Not only were they giving us fantastic covers, but they were actually inspiring us, because we had to, I don't know, you, Brendan, you'll know that, but in those days we had to write stories at school. We had to use our imagination. We had to come back every summer after what did you do? I always wrote in the style I thought of Terence Stewart. You know, one of my nan at the time wheezed and groaned every now and then, because I had to get it into the story. But they were inspiring us to do so many things. And we, of course, we now know that not only the TV show, but the target books were responsible for a hell of a lot of us either becoming writers or novelists or both, taking us into the industry, setting us up as careers. It was one artists. It was all that magical time where a lot of us grew up. Do any of you remember that one? Who was talking there? Sorry.
I was going to say, what you're saying about drawing, writing at school and stories. I had a friend at school. He was great as an artist. I would write the stories. So he would do the illustrations for the Doctor Who stories we would make in the classroom. So, and that only came from me reading the Target novels. It didn't come from the actual TV series itself. That was from me reading consistently the Target novels, just as he did as well. Which
absolutely
is beautiful.
Absolutely. Richard's saying to you here, John, that you were a little 2 legs out of his depth. And Gary's saying, reading under the sheets is why we all wear glasses now. It probably is, because I mean, you would be there for hours. You know, there were times when I heard my mum and dad going to bed and I'd still be reading the Target novel, or I'd gone back to start reading it again. And I'm sure the Cave Monsters was one of those.
I remember, I mean, you know, I'll say it for the final time tonight, but as an English teacher, I tell the kids, this is what taught me prefixes, suffixes, all the complicated language. I read all the Target books. And when I was only in first and second year secondary school, and they're asking you to write a story, and I would always try and get it into sci-fi, the teachers would always say, where have you got words like insubordination come from? And I thought, well, I've listened to the album, Genesis of the Daleks, insubordination. I had to learn. So I've always said to the kids at school, I've said, look, if you're into sci-fi, get a bit of H.G. Wells. But honestly, if you get into the Doctor Who target range, you've got a guaranteed 200 odd books that will teach you techno-babble science language that you had to look up. Otherwise, it made no bloody sense.
Yeah.
Some of the covers, of course, WHOTASTIC Panel and Who Viewers are iconic to this day and are creeping up in new forms, posters, audiobook covers. Most of them are audiobook covers now, let's face it. But into magazine covers. One of the most recognizable is this one. Now, this was iconic at the time. And now, I mean, I see this in the most bizarre places now. Does this ring a bell with you guys?
I purchased that at Longley.
That's a great cover.
The shop, lovely. Still in the collection now, and it's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah. What were you going to say there, Paul?
It's an iconic cover, definitely. It's an iconic cover. I remember buying this first time round, and it just grabs you as soon as you see it.
Yeah,
it's a classic embellishment of Death of the Daleks, because that didn't really happen in the story in that way. They were on fire, weren't they? But that is explosive, literally, isn't it? As an illustration.
It is, and that's Roy Knipe, of course, who's the artist for this. He wouldn't have had any idea back then when he painted this for this book that it would become as iconic and as strong an image as it has done, because even though it was designed for the Target books, it looks brilliant on the audiobook. It looks brilliant on Doctor Who magazine. It looked brilliant on the poster. It looks fantastic wherever it's produced. And gosh, you know, wow, what an achievement. I mean, there's no way they could have known.
It almost breaks the fourth wall, that picture. I mean, the colours are fantastic, but equally, the Dalek is almost eye-stalking you. It really is almost staring you out. And I think it has an almost fourth wall quality to it. as well as that amazing vibrant color. But I know it's what I mean. I nearly picked it myself as one of the standout ones, but you can't win them all, can you? But I have to say, it's a bit like Genesis of the Daleks at the end when the Dalek talks down the camera.
Well, it is, and it's just wonderful. But I had to point that one out because it's one of the ones I'm seeing constantly now. And it takes you back. When I see it, I just go, oh my gosh, I'm a little boy again, seeing it for the first time in the bookshop when I was a kid, going, right, that's this week's purchase, thank you very much. It's brilliant. I want to also mention as well for all these legendary people that worked on this range, but one of my favorite covers is this one by Jeff Cummins for the Horror of Fang Rock. I mean, I adore this cover. It's always been something that grabbed my attention. It's been mysterious. It's set the scene. I don't think you can ever top this particular cover here because, I mean, it captures the story beautifully. I don't know what you guys think.
Well, can I just speak on behalf of not me, but John Daly, our friend on the program, who will argue all the toss all the time, but I will agree with him on this one. I asked him his choice. This is his favorite cover. He said he's got a signed copy of this with Tom Baker. And he said it obviously captures the mood. It's the most authentic one in the interpretation of Tom Baker's Doctor. And that is his favorite. Anything with lighthouses and fog, he said, wins him over. But it's obviously got Tom Baker inside, and he got jelly babies when he talked to Tom Baker as well. So that's his favourites. John, our good old friend John.
Actually, actually, now you've mentioned him, and good for John for bringing him up. But we do have to mention Tom because Tom Baker played a huge role in establishing the Target book range because he went on tour after tour after tour across the United Kingdom as the Doctor to promote these books. And he signed so many of them, and there's so many pictures and stuff that you can have a look at, of course, with Tom, with young tykes. Oh, look, it's the Doctor and their latest book and what have you. But he certainly contributed to the success of these things, didn't he? And to sign as many as he must have done and taking time to speak to all these little kids. I mean, I love that. And again, I'm going to show this off as well. But earlier this year, I met him at the Invasion Blackpool gig, and I was so thrilled because he signed it for me as well. I actually thought at one point I'd missed him because I was busy at the Invasion Blackpool, and I thought, he would have gone, but he'd remembered I'd wanted one. And when he said, "Look, it's here, come and get it," I was like, oh, I was like, oh my god! And I had to run and get my wallet, didn't I, Brendan? Do you remember? I was like, oh my god, don't move! I was so worried he was going to leave, and I'd missed him, but I'm treasuring that one absolutely. And that goes with the Chris Achilles one, in a big envelope with lots of cardboard around it. So even though this one is iconic for me, and I think a lot of others, there's another one of Jeff's that also takes me back to a very happy time. Again, a Saturday afternoon, W.H. Smith, back in Liverpool in the 70s, and it's this one. Whoa! I mean, this one for me set the scene completely. Leela had just arrived, hadn't she, when this one came out? It wasn't long. We're still getting used to her. And then this oh goodness me, this cover comes along. We had to have that one. I was like, yes, I mean, we're going to have it anyway. But look at that. Isn't it absolutely stunning?
Do you mean I'm still trying to get used to Leela?
Oh, are you? We'll move on. But no, I mean, when I saw that Saturday afternoon, that cover blew me away. I was just like, there she is. There's the new girl on a cover. And this is her first story. I mean, I don't think they'd ever done that really at that point for any other companion. And it's because, the image, that pose, it sums up Leela, doesn't it, really? That was the iconic photograph or one of those publicity shots that Jeff there captures beautifully. I mean, look at the hair. It's an action shot. Absolutely fantastic.
But he's actually limited himself. He's limited himself to a sphere, and it's packed in there. I mean, it's packed like the jungle she comes from, really. But you're all a deep one little area, and he's made it zing. Very, very clever that, because if you think about it, he could have used a lot more, but he's kept it quite tight. And it's a bit like at the garden centres, you can get all the plants in a big glass. Well, I don't know what you call it, but it's like he's condensed it all in there, and it's all exploding out. Very clever trick, that.
Yeah, and you see artists doing that to this day, don't you? If you have a box, it's called, they come out the box slightly, don't they? A lot of people do that as well, you know, to these days. We had some nice comments there as well about that picture. Richard and Gary, they like that there. Gary's also pointing out that the books also told you how things work, like Matt Hulk explained naval terms. Actually, he did.
Yeah.
He really did. Actually, and there was one of the books, I can't remember what it was about now, but there was, I think it might have been The Fascination with Egyptology from Pyramids of Mars. But there was something there that I put into a school project and got a gold star for.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely.
So basically, you just turned in Terence's work, basically.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's called research. It's research, John. Gary's saying here, don't forget the library edition ones too. The library edition ones, for anybody outside the UK, they were big. We've mentioned just early in the show, they were larger hardback books with the same covers. You'll see them. You may know them if you're a Target fan, because they are hugely collectible now. And you can find them in certain antique marts and second-hand shops, but they're massively collectible. And they look gorgeous when they're all together. But they were quite a fairly nice print as well, and they were quite handy for us when we were learning to read and what have you. But these, of course, because they were hardback, were the ones that the schools originally would prefer.
Yeah.
And they were bought by the schools to sit in the school library. Now, as things got tighter for them financially, they would swap occasionally to they would eventually get all the paperback books, which sat in these horrible wire things and damaged the book if you weren't careful with some ham-fisted thing. Like Stephen, who I used to go to school with, please, never forgiven him. He would the Terror of the Zygons was hammered into this white thing on the wall. I'm like, no, you know, because he couldn't get it in properly. But they were beautiful books. Have a Google, you'll see them. They were just fantastic. The library edition books. No Wikipedia at the time. We learned so much from these, but absolutely we did, because those authors, as we said before, Richard, they knew what they were talking about, and they were well educated. They were proper, and they would throw in these little bits, these little nuggets that would stay with you. Well, to this very day, wouldn't they?
And it also got to a point with Target, they realised how popular they were when they started the club. You know, the Target Book Club, didn't they? And has anyone out there still got their Target badge by any chance? I thought you'd say yes.
I'm on Target with. Oh yes, I've got it over there. That's and I've got the Target one. You know, the one that's on our background, the actual Target one. Which in my car. That was the other beautiful thing. That logo was absolutely stunning, wasn't it? Because you could spot them, and you still can to this very day. You can spot a Target book on the shelf. Every time I'm in a secondhand bookshop now, even though I'm lucky, I've got the entire range of Target books. But when I see that, I go, whoop, I have to know what it is, just in case. I have to know, and I'll go over and have a look. And when they restylized it in the 80s, it didn't quite work, did it? Really, that particular one. I don't know why they did that. I suppose they were moving with the times, but sometimes, you know what? You shouldn't. Don't bother moving.
When you're talking pre-internet and the mailing list that you would get, they would write to you and they would say, right, coming soon, you know, and these were the novels that were coming down the road and the dates that they would be released. You know, that was how we found out about it.
Well, we did. You're absolutely right. You had that whole beautiful list there. We haven't got time to go into any of the spin-offs or anything. We might have to do another show if you want us to. But one of the other ways you got to find out was through this spin-off, which had all the covers on the back to that point. The legendary Doctor Who monster book by Target, which was again by Terence. And this actually brought us into the stories from the first 4 Doctors and introduced us as fans to some of these classics here. Again, Terence knew what he was talking about, but I always loved that back cover because look how gorgeous they look there.
Yeah.
It's magical, isn't it?
I spent hours looking at that.
Yeah, I think we all did.
I spent hours and hours looking at that. It's fantastic.
I mean, you've just, and then do you remember when you would look at these lists, and the one you were talking about as well, John, the printed one inside? There is one of my books which I will never forgive my younger self for because he's ticked off as he's got them. And I look at it now, go, you idiot! I don't care if you were 7.
But did you ever ask all your aunties and uncles, grandparents, and everybody, and you give them a list of every Doctor Who that you didn't have and that you knew was out there, so that everybody, a bit like B&M again, they were all going everywhere trying to grab. Didn't have
a bit more subtle. I used to just allow my parents to wake up early in the morning, with the print with the copy of what I wanted lying next to them on the pillow.
I love that. That's fantastic. I mean, for myself, Time Muddler, what was going on there is because I was reading and I was reading everything. The whole family knew if you can give him a Doctor Who book, he's happy. So that was I've always been quite easy for my friends and family, really. I'll give them some with the Doctor Who logo on, although these days I'm extremely picky. In those days I wasn't, because we only had the Target books, really, you know. And I remember even once the original version of Tomb with the Cybermen, with that cover which had the wrong Cyberman on. My next door neighbor gave it to me at the time. Yeah, you've got it there. And he gave me this book and I was thrilled. And then I said to him, but it's the wrong cover. And he looked at me as if to say, well, what are you talking about, kid? You know, that's the wrong cover, because it was the wrong Cyberman, you know. And but I was grateful for it. My neighbor had got it me. I mean, how cool was that? Right. So, Brendan, you wanted to talk a bit more about the Sea Devils, didn't you?
I did. It was I think I said earlier, this was my very first one. I got it when I was in hospital. It had already scared me as a program. And so, of course, this was the attempt, I suppose, to get me reading. I told you about my failed attempts at reading. I scribbled a lot on it. I've tried to retrieve it. I think the copies I sent you, you can see a scribble all over the back and everything. But this, I mean, obviously the Sea Devils grabbed me. That was it. I really liked it.
You don't hear that every day.
that and I have to say that cover was up there as one of my favorites actually as well, because it was the Pertwee Doctor I recognized, because some of the earlier Pertwee drawings, like in Cave Monster, I don't recognize that version of Pertwee, you see. So that kind of action face, I obviously knew Jo Grant. She was my first companion. 2 Sea Devils for the price of 1, and a submarine action. And you know, you got that really grabbed me. And that's Alan somebody, isn't it? He did some of the internal illustrations as well for some of the books.
This is Alan Willow. Sorry, I don't know where that's coming from. Sorry about that. Alan Willow did the graphics for what you've got there. Yeah, the illustrations.
Yeah, and of course a lot of the targets, we just like the program. If we had videos in the 70s, you're reading to get to the moment you kind of remembered, because you didn't remember all 6 blooming episodes and stuff like that. What you did remember is them coming out the water. I remember the Sea Devil submarine attack. And so there's a moment, the passage grabs me and the scaly arm is mentioned and the scream, because the scream I remember.
Let's just say goodbye to Tally Spider, because he's got to go. He said, battery low, time to go. Thanks for a great show. Informative. We did not have these books over here when I was a boy. When your battery's back, mate, come back and watch the rest of the show, because we've got a bit more to go. We've got a couple more things to talk about. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. And bloop, is his battery gone? Go on then, Brandon. Sorry about that.
So no, it was just, as I said, you know, there were some passages in there where it took me back, because your early memory as well. I mean, there's bits that scare you from the program, and the Target books tend to do a kind of repeat for you. And again, a bit like I said with the Sontaran experiment, the moments are longer in the book. And Malcolm Hulke, again, is one of those writers who is not scared of describing. So you had the whole submarine attack. You had how they came out the water. You had the first encounter between the Third Doctor on that kind of old base. I can't remember what you call it now, when that first Sea Devil was there. And when it attacked the door and it was trying to melt it, and the scaly arm came through again. You know, I was really, once I learned to read a bit better and stop scribbling, I really did want to read those bits. And what really introduced me to reading properly was finding those bits in the book, and the illustrations helped me because you could locate them. And so I don't think I read the Sea Devils as you would a book from beginning to end. I think I learned after the scribbling, dodgy vandalism phase, I learned then to go for the highlights. And then I embellished it out as I got a bit older. So it's an important book, because this is probably the first book I ever learned to read properly. But I started with scribbling. I then looked at the highlights where all of the pictures were, and then I learned to read the whole thing.
I love all these stories because it just show you the impact it had on us as a generation. These books, they were so important to us. I did bring that up very quickly there. I'm going to do this again as well, because the Pyramids of Mars for me is still to this day very, very magical. That cover scared the hell out of me. I can't quite tell you why. I think it's because, the mummies in the show frightened me, especially when they squeezed. Yeah, when they squeezed poor old thingy, what's it, to death. Yeah. And this book I read with trepidation because the cover was enough to go. Do you know what I mean by that, guys?
It's still my
definitely.
favorite.
Yep.
It's still my favorite in the range. I would say the one thing that I remember reading a few years back as well was when Terence talks about the mummies actually make noises, like they're angry, they're aggressive, and I was like, oh, okay. But then it also talks about they were created to keep the Egyptian people in line, so it almost implies that Horus and co weren't good guys. They were enslaving the Egyptians just
well, they were just as bad as the whole lot of them. The Assyrians were not nice. I mean, doesn't the Doctor actually say something along those lines in the Pyramids of Mars book?
Yeah,
I'm sure it's in it might even be in the TV show. I don't know, but there's somewhere where you go, actually, they were all as bad as each other. And you're right. Those extra elements, John, I didn't like that as a young boy. I was like, oh, okay, because the TV show was bad enough, and then getting the book and and all that sort of, and the sound effects and everything as well. You could hear it when you were reading it. The time tunnel and all this sort of stuff. And oh my goodness me!
But also the big thing for me from the novel is you talk about, Marcus Scarman killing Lawrence, but
his brother.
It's described in detail by Terence what is happening. Whereas in the episode on telly, it just cuts out, doesn't it? You just hear the screaming, which is bad enough. But the book explains it a bit further about what he is actually doing to him.
You wouldn't get that today, would you? You wouldn't get all these today. Oh no, they wouldn't let us have any of this today. Not a chance. They'd be too precious about all this. But back in our day, they didn't care. They was all scared of the buggers, and that's it, wasn't it, John?
And just like the spiders under the quilt, that was not a very good recommendation for a read.
Why did we read some of these things late at night when we're trying to sleep? Because that one.
I mean, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but when you read your target books, did you try and kind of replicate the cliffhangers and try and stop reading after the cliffhanger to save it a bit? Because I did.
And what Richard just said there, I cannot read that book now without that music and that sound in my head. Going back, as we were saying, the episodes, the cliffhangers, I would be piecing out cliffhangers in my head. That's one of the joys of the target novels, isn't it?
Yeah, and Richard's agreeing with what you said there. I think we all do, because if you haven't read The Pyramids of Mars, again, it's another one you've got to read, because this bit is where it brings it home. Marcus, you're hurting me. And we're kids reading this sort of stuff, and it was just, oh my God. No wonder they didn't read it on Jack and Nori, actually, thinking about it. Maybe some of them are too gruesome.
And I think also this story is a very valid point on, I think Ncuti Gatwa has basically said recently that the Doctor Who is all about love and compassion. But in this episode, in this story, Sarah actually goes to criticize the Doctor by saying, after he's found him dead, is basically saying, oh, sometimes I think you're not. And the Doctor says to her, not human.
Yes.
And he's basically making the point, I am not like you. I am different to you. And my view of the Doctor has always been, he's looking to do what is good, but he's not about love. He's about making sure that he gets the win, the victory that he needs to defeat the enemy. That's always been my interpretation of the Doctor. And Tom plays it brilliantly.
He really does, yeah. But again, it's that whole thing of the Doctor's not a human being, which I think has been forgotten in the modern day. Yeah. He's not a human being. He doesn't have human emotions. He doesn't fancy his companions because it's beyond him. He's an alien. And in the Target books, all those original Target books, he's there. This is an alien being that we happen to be sharing this adventure with, who at any point could do something that we don't expect because he is alien. And it actually, in some of the books, I think it could be it could be later on. I can't remember now, but I remember one. I can't remember which one it was. But it had an effect on me where I thought, actually, being a companion to the Doctor must be exhausting. Because he's like this, he's going from one to another, and as a human being, we're going, who are you today? What's happening here? You know, and it comes out in Pyramids, I think, with that one as well, because it really is. Gary's brought this up, and yes, we are going to talk about this very, very quickly, Gary, because we're celebrating 50 years of the Target books. We're celebrating all the wonderful authors, the illustrators, the fantastic cover art. But as Gary points out here, there was a small part that we will acknowledge now, and we're not going to linger on this for too long, but there was a Serpent in Paradise because the photo covers were there. Now, this was a bizarre time for Doctor Who Target books. My goodness me. Now, these are just a couple of examples of where they went to. Brendan's going to show us another one in a minute, but I remember these two. I was on holiday in the Isle of Man when these two came out. So I got these two from the Isle of Man, and I looked at this photograph of Peter Davison in them thinking, what are they doing? And I know these two were a tester here, but it doesn't work. And if you're going to do it with the 5th, you would have to do it with the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th as well. And it just didn't work. I mean, the artwork's lovely. We know that. Yeah. But that photograph one didn't work. But they were the better ones out of these photographic covers, because of course what we got before this was that was the first one. The Visitation was the first photographic cover we got, and it got worse. And I mean, look at Arc of Infinity. That is shockingly bad. It's
Terminus. It's just an orangey with it was
pinky color. Yeah.
And it's a shame because actually, for example, I loved the Visitation. I loved that version. I loved reading that. It's just that I know I'm a bit older. I was about 12 or 13 now, but I still wanted the illustrations of the key moments. And instead, you got quite a flat. I mean, it's a friendly. What did you say? How did Terence Dix describe? A
pleasant open face. Gosh, it's in there.
Yeah. There you go. But you want more than that. A story's not written around a pleasant, open-faced character. You don't do that. You need him to be.
I mean, there were a lot of stories, Who viewers, in case you don't know, as to why the Target covers suddenly in the early 80s went from artwork to photography. Now, this wasn't popular with us as fans at the time, and I'm sure they must have got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters every week to say, from disgruntled teenage lads like me who are going, no, this isn't working. This doesn't work. Some of the stories go that Mr. Davison wasn't happy with the likenesses that the artists were coming up with, which I can believe, because you see some of those original artwork and they didn't quite do him justice with his pleasant open face there, the very handsome young man that he was. Oh, he's a very handsome man now, of course he is. But, so I can understand why Mr. Davison would say, no, I don't like that, do it again. And they just didn't have the time. But to resort to the photograph was just a low for me, because, with the Visitation, they got it right years later, because he says, moving on very quickly from the photographic books, they learned their lesson. Didn't they? And what happened eventually is we started to see the art coming back, and one of the biggest artists, again, if you like, the third set of generations coming into the artist books was heralded by this man here. Alistair Pearson made his name through the Target books because he was so popular. And good evening to Alistair if he is tuning in. I mean, goodness me. I mean, what a touch. There's the rejacketed blue spine edition of the Pyramids of Mars. But he managed to capture the magic again to these books after us having to go through certain periods here with some of these photographic things. I mean, look at these. And again, guys, I don't know if you've seen it, but he got to do a hell of a lot of the books, but some of them didn't make the cut. And one of the covers that he had in mind for the Trial of a Time Lord range didn't get approved, and he had to do it again, and it was this one. I like this one.
Oh,
now he shared this years later. This is his original plan for the Ultimate Foe. Now the original version had to have Mr. Popplewick on it, but I like this, and I think he captures both Linda and Michael there beautifully.
Yeah, it's nice.
He does, yeah.
I don't know. But there we go. I mean, what were your memories when you suddenly started seeing Paul?
Did you see in the top right-hand corner number 131?
Ah, yeah. Go on, explain that.
I'll let you.
Because they didn't get there, basically. It wasn't there. 131 would have been. They stopped at 130. Yeah. That's when the novels came to which was the last one? 130. Oh, actually, no. There's 134 for Paradise Towers because that came a bit later, didn't it? So yeah. So there was something magical about that. Maybe 131 was the Trial of a Time, but even that they mucked up. I wish I'd put the graphics on now because the Trial of a Time Lord was supposed to be all the same with the blue ribbon and everything, but Mind Warp came out.
Yeah.
And it's when you look at the 4 books now, they were all supposed to have a blue spine. Mind Warp was the very last one that came out. It's got a white spine, different flash on the front of it, different logo on the front of it. They should have known better by then. But when you guys started seeing Alistair's work coming out, Paul, what did you think of these new looks to the Target books?
The new looks, I think, are really good. I think the Alistair Pearson's artwork is great, and he carried that on through the VHS range as well, which is superb. I think he's a great artist, and I gave it a real boost, a real renaissance to the covers. And he did quite a lot, didn't he? He did quite a few of the re-releases, didn't he?
Yes, he did practically all, I think, of the Blue Spine books. Because what happened, of course, is when the Doctor Who range finished, the owners of Target at the time started to re-release them. They had already started releasing certain ones so that people that were coming to the Target books could go back and get the out of print ones. And Alistair was commissioned to do the new jackets, the new covers for them, and they all had blue spines. So they're called the Blue Spine Library. So when you put them all together, they're all dark blue. There's no differentiation, and the font changed for them on the side as well. The Target Library stayed, the reissued logo stayed, but my goodness, yeah. But they didn't last the course. One of them is there. You can see the new jacket design there on the Pyramids of Mars. It was a sort of stylized logo that they all had based on a Doctor Who adventure was first put in there.
Lovely cover, isn't it? That period.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and again, that's cropped up, hasn't it? Over the years, that's cropped up on CD covers and stuff like this, and posters and stuff. It's wonderful to see it all being reused. But this was brilliant of Alistair to give it a fresh coat of paint, really, wasn't it? I mean, this is where it really got a little bit more. Oh, hang on a minute, the art covers are back, and weren't we grateful?
What was the reason? Forgive me if I'm wrong, but when Target first came about, didn't they go for the art covers because if it was photo covers, they would have to pay a fee to the actor.
Yeah.
Which that was why I was surprised in the 80s when they went for the photo versions for a short time and didn't just carry on as they had done since the beginning.
It is very strange because they must have negotiated something with the actor, but it would have been cheaper for them, like they did with the Twin Dilemma, to just put the monsters from the. I mean, the Visitation would have looked great with the pteroleptals on, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And the whole Great Fire of London thing, maybe some rats, which eventually I think happened. But Alistair did the Visitation years later, and spot on. The likeness was spot on there. He also did this one. Paul, I know you like this particular one, but he did the cover for this particular book, Remembrance of the Daleks, written by Ben Aronovich. Now, Ben, of course, has gone on to be a best-selling author. But you can actually see in his fledgling book here, you can actually see a real fresh take from a writer, can't you?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, this is a cracking read, this book. It really is. I think we talked about this before on another podcast, and it was another show about Remembrance. I think it was. We talked about this book. There's a lot of detail, a lot of perspective from some of the from the Dalek creatures and Davros and stuff, and different angles, points of view, which is great. And this kind of led into further development of the novels, like the New Adventures and stuff, didn't it, with Mark Platt and all that kind of stuff. So it all developed further from that and matured, and Doctor Who got more adult as the New Adventure came along, and things developed further into brand new stories.
Oh, it absolutely did. I mean, John, were you there? Were you still buying the books at the time when Ben and we do have to mention Mark Platt as well, because he did a couple of them there. He did Ghostlight, of course, and he also wrote Battlefield, if memory corrects. Is correct there.
That's right. Yeah, I was still buying at that time, and as Paul said, that you suddenly felt that they were going into sort of more adult content within the books. And I mean, Remembrance of the Daleks, that whole racism element to it. And, you know, as Brendan was talking about earlier, you know, saying about you should write kids' books for adults effectively, and vice versa, because kids are intelligent. And, you know, the way that Remembrance of the Daleks novel was put together, you know, it's very, very well done. It's still in my collection as a treasured novel, and I never get bored of it. And he's just a fantastic writer, isn't he?
It's also interesting that particular book, Remembrance of the Daleks, was selected for a reprint, I think about 10 years ago now. I think it was for the 50th anniversary reprint books. And Remembrance of the, it was, wasn't it? It was the 50th anniversary. God, 10 years ago. And Remembrance was republished in a slightly oversized book, paperback book, as part of the whole 11 Doctors series there. And that was brilliant to see Ben's book back on shelves. You can still get it. You can still get that reprint edition.
Yeah, very, very good. And like Paul said, it sort of led the way into the new novels that were to come a few years later.
Yeah, I mean, one of the clever things about it, though, is I don't think, and correct me if you don't feel the same, I didn't notice really because I was older. So by this point, I'm in my late teens by the time these things are coming out. I'd grown up with these things, you know, and suddenly Remembrance is coming out. I remember being so excited about it. I got to the end of Remembrance, started it again, because it was so fresh and it was exciting. And it did build on what we'd seen on television in a very smart way. It was so sophisticated, you know, it added elements to it. The way it was written was more mature. And I think because we'd got to that point where, let's face it, in that point in your teenage years, you're highly pretentious. You think you know it all. You know, you're heading towards your 20s. Man, yeah, you're there. You know, you got it. You got to hang on this life thing. Little do you know. But, you know, the books suddenly were showing that. And it was brilliant how both Ben came along and then Mark as well. Mark Platt came along, and they got you involved with these books in a way that changed your perception of them. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean that story, Remembrance of the Daleks, again, is a favourite of mine. It is such a, watching it originally at broadcast, it was phenomenal. But when you go to the actual novel as well and how it builds on it, but we kind of touched on it a bit earlier as well. All of these fantastic writers, what they're great at is world building. You might have a small budget for the TV production, but when it's on the written page, you know, they could have 5,000 ships attacking Earth, and, you know, they could add that into the story. But the way that they focus on the characterization and the story first, ahead of all that, is just miles above anything that we're getting at the moment. And I'm glad I was at a time when I was privileged to have these coming out on a regular basis. I could just sit down and read and then wait for the next one.
I think we'll hear for that, and I think you speak for all of us that remember these books with such passion, and you can still go back to them now. That's the magic of it, isn't it? Gary's saying here as well that he was annoyed when they stopped the reprints from the 90s. Alistair was doing a marvelous job, and they made a great uniform collection. It's a bit of a shame because Gary, I started to get a couple of them, a few of them. They're over there. And then I thought, what are you doing? You've got all these before. You know, stop it. And they were quite costly as well. They were definitely in the pounds by this point as well. Nothing to where they are now, but certainly at the time they were a little bit so, hang on a minute. But I've got friends that I feel for them because it was an incomplete collection. And it's such a shame. If you're going to start something like that, you have to see it through, especially when it's something like us as Doctor Who. I mean, who'd have thought 50 years of the Target book, though? And who'd have thought that BBC Books would partner with Penguin and bring some of them back so many years ago with that gold cover there, with the original covers and some forwards by people associated with the show. When this came out, I knew this was a tester. I absolutely knew this was a tester to see if they would sell. And of course, they did sell. And the big thing about it is that, you know, they are around today. They have been coming out. They are doing exactly what they did for us with the new stories. And you can see that they've also managed to get things that weren't published in the original run. So we've had the Pirate Planet come out. We've had Resurrection of the Daleks. We've had Revelation of the Daleks. You know, we've had a new version of Androids of Tara. We've got a new version there of Warrior's Gate by the original. But there they are. They've even managed to get Gary Russell's TV movie put into the range now, which, of course, it wasn't originally. So the books are back and they're going forward. And it's amazing to see that. You know, there are certain people on YouTube as well. I'm going to say hello to Lewis at the moment. He's a young man that's devoted to these things, and I watch him reviewing them, and what his passion comes out of them. I'll put the description to his channel. He's only a young man, this will be nice. He's in the comments box. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but he's loving them, and it reminds me of me. If I'd had this sort of stuff when I was a kid, I'd be there as soon as I read a book, reviewing it as well, and telling the world what I thought about it. It's absolutely fantastic. But wow, so. You know, and they're doing this big promotional campaign at the moment, 50 years of the Target books. This is the point of sale in some of the bookshops, if you can find one in this day and age, on the high street. And, you know, I've seen one of these in Waterstones recently. It was nice to see it there. I'm not a big fan of the new versions of the covers. I can see what they're trying to do, but for more information on my feelings about this, go and have a look at Merchandise Paradise. I'm not a big fan. I'd rather they did something which is something fresh, basically, for a new generation. I don't know. But wow, yeah, we haven't had time to look at everything else. We haven't had time to look at the spin-offs. No, we haven't had time to look at any of those. Anything that came through, nothing at all, because there's been so much to talk about. I hope you've all enjoyed the show tonight. Richard is saying he loved. I love that those Target novelizations now look great. If you are getting those, brilliant. I hope you're enjoying them all. And Gary is saying here as well, Paradise Towers and Greatest Show were nice, solid reads too. They absolutely were. And again, the genius of those books, written by the original teleplay authors, expanded a little bit more. The whole thing in Greatest Show, Gary, is you'll know that whole thing with the gods of Ragnarok. Now there's extra elements there, isn't it? The whole history with the Doctrine stuff. It's all Curse of Fenric again. That was a bloody big book, that one, wasn't it? That really did really well there. So listen, guys, we're coming to the end of this celebratory show for 50 years of the Target books. Thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you so much for joining me for this. It's been a really packed show. Thank you to everybody that's joined us. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. You know, please do feel free to put any comments that you've got about the show in the comment box. What's Richard saying here? Richard is saying here, I mean, the missing classic stories. I haven't bought the new Who. All right, fair enough. Okay, the missing classic stories. You can still get them. You know, you have to, if you can find any antique old-fashioned bookshops like that, they are still around. And Jamie here is saying, a very engaging show, most enjoyable. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching us. You have been watching us here on Whose Views, the Golden Shots, 50 years of Target. Please do like the share, subscribe to the channel if you're finding us for the first time, and yeah, let us know what you think in the comments here, what your favorites were. Gentlemen, the Whotastic panel, thank you so much once again for joining me. I hope you've had a great show.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Oh God, yes. Memory lane.
Yeah.
I'm going off to read
Sea
Devils now, thanks to Brendan.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to get the torch out.
Get the torch out, but make sure there's somebody else in the house, and have a kind of toilet pan by the bed.
Yeah, and a carrot.
Oh, well, that's it. We're all sorted now for reading. Thank you for joining us. We will see you next time on Whose Views. Don't forget, please do like and subscribe, and we will see you again very soon. Good night, Whotastic panel. Good night, Who viewers. Take care. We'll see you again soon.
Enjoy reading.
Bye.